She's with me. When a maintenance worker in dusty work boots dared to speak 3 words at a billion-dollar banquet, he didn't just stop the cruelty, he shattered the illusion of power itself. The room of elites froze. The billionaire heiress at the head of the table went pale, because those 3 simple words unlocked a secret that would destroy reputations, expose the true meaning of worth, and prove that sometimes the quietest voice carries the sharpest blade. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale travels. The grandeur room of the Sterling Heights Hotel had witnessed many displays of wealth, but tonight's gathering eclipsed them all. Crystal chandeliers worth more than most homes cascaded light across tables dressed in ivory silk. 23 of the city's most influential power brokers occupied the private dining space, their combined net worth exceeding $12 billion. They laughed too loudly, drank too freely, and wore their privilege like armor that had never been tested. At the center of the long table, Marcus Thornhill held court. The real estate magnate's voice boomed across the room as he gestured with a wine glass that cost more than a month's rent for most people. His face was flushed with expensive bourbon and the particular confidence that came from never being told no. "I'm telling you, Richard, the waterfront project is a guaranteed return," Marcus said, slapping the shoulder of the man beside him. 18 months, triple your investment. The city council is already in our pocket. Around him, agreements flowed as easily as the wine. These were people who moved markets with phone calls, who shaped skylines with signatures, who believed their bank accounts gave them the right to reshape the world according to their vision. At the far end of the table, trying to make herself invisible, sat Emma Chen. 26 years old, recently hired as an executive assistant to one of the investment firms represented tonight. She wore a simple black dress that she'd agonized over for hours, knowing it wasn't quite right but unable to afford anything better. Her hands trembled slightly as she took notes on her tablet, recording discussions that would determine the financial futures of thousands of people who would never know these decisions were being made. Emma had been invited only because her boss, Gregory Walsh, needed someone to document the evening's verbal agreements. She wasn't supposed to speak, wasn't supposed to exist beyond her function, and for the first 2 hours she'd managed exactly that. Then Marcus Thornhill noticed her. "Hey, sweetheart," he called down the table, his words slightly slurred. "You getting all this down? Making sure your boss knows which way the wind blows?" Emma nodded quickly, not making eye contact. "Yes, sir." "Yes, sir," Marcus mimicked in a high-pitched voice, triggering laughter from several others. "Look at that. Still knows respect. That's refreshing." He turned to the woman beside him, Veronica Sterling, an investment banker known for her ruthless deal-making. "Not like the young people these days, right? All entitlement, no work ethic." Veronica's smile was sharp as glass. "Indeed. Though I must say, Gregory, your choice of assistant is quaint. Where did you find her? A temp agency?" The table's attention shifted to Emma like a spotlight she couldn't escape. Her face burned as Gregory Walsh, her boss, laughed uncomfortably. "Emma came highly recommended," Gregory said, but his tone held an apologetic edge, as if he were defending a questionable purchase. "Very efficient. Hard worker." "Hard worker," Marcus repeated, leaning back in his chair to get a better look at Emma. "Is that code for something? Because between you and me, Gregory, when I hire assistants, I make sure they're easy on the eyes. Improves office morale, if you know what I mean." More laughter rippled through the group. Emma's fingers froze over her tablet. She'd dealt with comments like this before. In college, at her previous job, walking down the street. The casual cruelty of people who believed their positions gave them license to reduce others to objects for their amusement. "Actually," a younger man named Derek Fontaine interjected, "I think Marcus has a point. If you're going to have someone sitting in on meetings, taking calls, representing your office, shouldn't they at least look the part?" He gestured vaguely toward Emma. "No offense, sweetheart, but that dress looks like you bought it at a discount store." Emma's throat tightened. The dress had indeed come from a discount store. She had 3 such dresses in her closet, rotated carefully to create the illusion of variety. She made $38,000 a year in a city where studio apartments started at $2,000 a month. Her student loans consumed another chunk. The dress had been a calculated investment. "Oh dear," Veronica said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Did we hit a nerve? Darling, it's nothing personal. It's just that in our world, image matters. Surely you understand that. Emma understood perfectly. She understood that to people like Veronica, she was disposable, replaceable, someone who existed to serve and then disappear from memory the moment her function ended. "Leave her alone," someone said, but the protest came from James Wu, a tech entrepreneur near the end of the table, and his voice was weak, quickly drowned out by Marcus's booming response. "Oh, come on, James. We're just having a little fun. No harm meant." Marcus raised his glass toward Emma in a mock toast. "Tell you what, sweetheart, you want some advice from someone who's made it? Invest in yourself. Better clothes, maybe a little makeup. Do something with that hair. A woman in your position needs every advantage she can get." The words hit Emma like physical blows. She'd pulled her hair back in a simple bun because she thought it looked professional. She wore minimal makeup because she couldn't afford the brands that didn't irritate her sensitive skin. Every choice she'd made had been careful, considered, an attempt to meet standards that kept shifting out of reach. "Actually," Emma said, her voice smaller than she intended, "I think professionalism is about competence, not appearance." The table went quiet, not the thoughtful quiet of people considering a good point, but the dangerous quiet of predators who just spotted movement from prey that was supposed to stay still. Marcus set down his glass slowly. "Did she just talk back?" "I think she did," Veronica said, amusement coloring her tone. "How bold." Gregory Walsh shot Emma a look that screamed silence, but she'd already crossed a line she couldn't uncross. Her heart hammered against her ribs as Marcus leaned forward, his earlier humor replaced by something colder. "Let me tell you something about the real world, sweetheart," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a register that somehow carried more menace than his earlier volume. "Competence is baseline. It's the minimum. You think every Yale graduate working on Wall Street is incompetent? No, they're all competent. So what separates the winners from the losers? Image. Presentation. Knowing your place and playing the game." He stood, moving around the table with the confidence of someone who'd never been physically threatened in his life. Several others watched with interest, sensing entertainment. "You know what your problem is?" Marcus continued, now standing behind Emma's chair. She could smell the bourbon on his breath. "You think hard work matters. You think doing your job well means something, but you're just a glorified secretary. You're here to smile, look pretty, and make your boss appear more important. That's it. And you can't even manage the look pretty part." Emma's vision blurred. She would not cry in front of these people. She would not give them that satisfaction. "Marcus, that's enough," James Wu said, louder this time, but Marcus waved him off. "I'm teaching her a valuable lesson. She should thank me." Marcus picked up Emma's tablet from the table, holding it just out of her reach. "Tell you what, I'll give this back when you admit you're out of your depth. When you acknowledge that people like us are different from people like you. Better than people like you." Emma's hands clenched in her lap. The room swam with humiliation and rage and helplessness. She opened her mouth to say something, anything, knowing that whatever came out would probably cost her her job, but unable to remain silent any longer. Then a glass of water appeared on the table in front of her. Not placed gently, not slid across the surface, simply appeared, as if materialized from nowhere, the water inside perfectly still despite the movement that must have brought it. Emma looked up. A man stood beside her chair. He was tall but not imposing, perhaps early 30s, with dark hair that needed a cut and eyes that held a peculiar calm. He wore work pants with visible stains, a canvas jacket over a faded t-shirt, and steel-toed boots that had clearly seen years of hard use. His hands were clean but calloused, and there was something about his posture, relaxed but alert, that suggested a different kind of strength than the financial power that filled this room. The dining room had gone absolutely silent. The man didn't look at Marcus Thornhill, even though Marcus still held Emma's tablet and was staring at this intruder with an expression of complete disbelief. The man's attention was entirely on Emma, and his voice, when he spoke, carried the same quiet calm as his presence. "She's with me." 3 words, 3 simple words that somehow changed the entire atmosphere of the room. Marcus found his voice first. "Excuse me? Who the hell are you?" The man finally turned to face Marcus, and something in that movement made the real estate magnate take an involuntary step backward. There was no threat in the stranger's expression, no aggression, just an unwavering steadiness that somehow felt more dangerous than any display of anger could have been. "I'm Daniel Cross," the man said, "and I believe you have something that belongs to her." He gestured to the tablet still in Marcus's hand. For a long moment, Marcus stood frozen, his alcohol-fueled confidence colliding with an instinct that warned him he'd miscalculated something fundamental. Then, with a forced laugh that didn't quite land, he tossed the tablet onto the table. "Security should have stopped you at the door," Marcus said, trying to reclaim control. "This is a private event." "I was doing maintenance in the building," Daniel replied. "Heard raised voices. Thought someone might need help." His gaze moved around the table, touching briefly on each face. Several people looked away. "Seems I was right." Gregory Walsh stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Emma, you know this man?" Emma shook her head, too shocked to form words. She'd never seen Daniel Cross before in her life, yet he'd inserted himself into her nightmare, as if he had every right to be there. "Then I'm calling security," Gregory said, reaching for his phone. "Wait." The word came from the head of the table, where until now, one person had remained silent throughout the entire evening's cruelty. Isabella Rowan, 29 years old, heiress to the Rowan Industries fortune, CEO of a company valued at $3 billion, rose from her chair with a grace that suggested every movement was calculated. She wore a midnight blue dress that probably cost more than Emma's car, her dark hair swept up in an elegant twist, her face a carefully maintained mask of composure. Isabella Rowan was known for three things: her ruthless business acumen, her emotional detachment, and her ability to command any room she entered. Right now, as she stared at Daniel Cross, she looked like someone who'd seen a ghost. "Daniel Cross," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "You said your name is Daniel Cross?" Daniel turned to face her, and for the first time his expression shifted. Not dramatically, but enough that Emma noticed a flicker of recognition, of memory, of something complicated passing between these two people who clearly knew each other. "Miss Rowan," Daniel said, and there was something in his tone. Not quite familiarity, not quite formality, something in between. Isabella's hand moved to the silver necklace at her throat, her fingers closing around it reflexively. "I know you." "You knew me," Daniel corrected gently. "A long time ago." The room watched this exchange with the fascination of people witnessing something they didn't understand but sensed was significant. Marcus Thornhill, his moment of power stolen, tried to reassert himself. "Isabella, do you want me to have this man removed? He's clearly disturbed the evening." "Be quiet, Marcus." Isabella's words were soft, but absolute. Marcus's mouth snapped shut. She moved around the table with measured steps, her eyes never leaving Daniel's face. "How long has it been?" 12 years, Daniel said. "You were 17. 17, Isabella echoed, and something cracked in her controlled expression. Her hand tightened on the necklace. The accident. Emma watched this unfold with growing confusion. The entire table leaned forward slightly, drawn into a drama they didn't comprehend. Even Veronica Sterling's sharp smile had faded, replaced by genuine curiosity. Daniel nodded once. "The accident. You disappeared," Isabella said. And now there was something accusatory in her voice, something raw. "After you pulled us out, you just disappeared. We looked for you. My father looked everywhere. The police couldn't find you. It was like you never existed." "I had reasons for leaving," Daniel replied. "What reasons?" Isabella demanded, her composure cracking further. "You saved our lives. You nearly died doing it. My father wanted to thank you, wanted to—" She stopped, her voice catching. "He died 3 years ago. Did you know that?" "I read about it," Daniel said quietly. "I'm sorry. He was a good man." Isabella's laugh was bitter. "A good man who spent the last 12 years of his life looking for someone who didn't want to be found." She turned away, then spun back, anger now evident in her voice. "Do you have any idea what that night did to us? What you disappearing did to us?" The room had gone from confused to captivated. This was better than any entertainment they could have orchestrated. The untouchable Isabella Rowan, showing genuine emotion for the first time in anyone's memory, confronting a maintenance worker in dirty boots about some long-ago accident. Daniel's calm finally wavered. "I didn't mean to cause pain." "Then what did you mean to do?" Isabella shot back. "Save us and vanish? Like we didn't deserve an explanation? Like what you did didn't matter?" "It mattered," Daniel said, his voice quiet but firm. "Everything mattered. But I had a daughter who needed me. I had a life I couldn't abandon, not even for—" He stopped himself. Isabella's eyes widened. "Not even for what? Say it." The silence stretched unbearably. Emma felt like an intruder in a moment that was far too private for this public space. Others around the table seemed to feel the same, uncomfortable but unable to look away. Finally, Daniel spoke. "Not even for the debt your father thought he owed me." "Debt?" Isabella's voice rose. "He didn't think he owed you anything. He knew you saved his life, saved my life. That's not a debt, that's—" She stopped, her hand going to her necklace again. "You left because you didn't want him to repay you?" "I left because I couldn't be who he needed me to be," Daniel said. "I was a different person then, lost, broken. Your father saw potential in me that didn't exist. I couldn't let him waste his resources trying to fix something that was already too damaged." Isabella stared at him for a long moment, and Emma saw something shift in her expression. Understanding, perhaps. A recognition of a kind of pain that matched her own hidden wounds. "You're wrong," Isabella said finally. "You weren't broken. You were the only person who acted when everyone else was too afraid. You were the only one who—" Her voice broke completely, and she turned away, her shoulders rigid with the effort of maintaining control. Marcus Thornhill, reading the room with a politician's instinct, saw an opportunity to redirect attention. "This is all very touching," he said loudly, "but I fail to see what a dramatic reunion has to do with this young woman lying about knowing you." He pointed at Emma. "She clearly doesn't have a relationship with Mr. Cross here, which means he lied to interrupt our dinner." Daniel's attention returned to Marcus, and Emma saw something harden in his expression. "I never said she knew me. I said she was with me. There's a difference." "Semantics," Marcus scoffed. "You're still lying." "I'm claiming her," Daniel interrupted, his voice still calm but now carrying an edge that made several people at the table straighten in their chairs. "Under any definition of decency or protection, I'm standing with her against people who think their money gives them the right to humiliate someone for entertainment." Veronica Sterling laughed, though it sounded forced. "How noble!" The working-class hero swoops in to save the damsel in distress. "I don't need to save anyone," Daniel replied, looking at Emma for the first time since his initial appearance. "She doesn't need saving. She needs people to stop being cruel." His gaze swept the table again. "Which, from what I heard walking in, seems to be asking too much from this group." Gregory Walsh stood again, his face red. "Now see here, you can't just walk into a private event and insult." "I can," Daniel said simply. "I just did. And unless someone here wants to physically remove me, I'm going to stay right where I am until this young woman feels safe enough to leave on her own terms." The challenge hung in the air. Several of the men at the table were larger than Daniel, younger than Daniel, more conventionally powerful than Daniel. But something about his presence, that absolute calm, that unwavering certainty, made the idea of physically confronting him feel dangerous in a way none of them wanted to test. Isabella Rowan, who had been silent during this exchange, moved back to her seat at the head of the table. She sat down carefully, her composure returning piece by piece, like armor being reassembled. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Everyone sit down." It wasn't a request. One by one, the people at the table resumed their seats. Marcus hesitated longest, clearly unhappy about surrendering his position of power, but eventually he too sat. Isabella's gaze moved to Emma. "What's your name?" "Emma Chen, Ms. Rowan." "Emma Chen," Isabella repeated. She looked at Gregory Walsh. "She works for you?" "Yes," Gregory confirmed. "As an executive assistant. She's here in a professional capacity." And in that professional capacity, she was subjected to commentary about her appearance, her clothing, and her worth as a human being. Isabella's tone was conversational, but Emma heard steel underneath. Is that accurate? Gregory shifted uncomfortably. There may have been some lighthearted, is that accurate? Isabella repeated. Yes, Gregory admitted quietly. Isabella nodded slowly. Her fingers drummed once on the table, a gesture of contained emotion. Then she looked at Marcus Thornhill. You led this light-hearted conversation? Marcus's face flushed. It was harmless, just some fun between colleagues. Fun, Isabella said flatly. She looked at Veronica. You participated? Veronica had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. It was poor judgment. Poor judgment. Isabella's lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. Interesting way to describe cruelty. She stood again, and this time everyone remained seated, understanding that her movements were deliberate, controlled, dangerous. Let me tell you all a story. She walked slowly behind the chairs, her hand trailing along the backs. 12 years ago, on a night very much like this one, I was riding in a car with my father. We were coming from an event not unlike this dinner, surrounded by wealth, power, influence. My father was on the phone, making deals that would affect thousands of people. I was thinking about college applications and which Ivy League school would be most advantageous for my career. Emma watched Isabella's face as she spoke, seeing emotions that had been carefully hidden now surfacing in controlled doses. It was raining, Isabella continued. The roads were slick. Our driver, an employee of 20 years, a man whose name was George Kimball, a man with a wife and 3 children, lost control on a bridge. The car went through the railing and into the river. Several people at the table looked uncomfortable now, sensing where this story was heading. The water was freezing, Isabella said, her voice distant with memory. The car filled in seconds. My father got his seatbelt off, got mine off, broke the window. But the current was strong. I was 17 years old and I was drowning in black water, and I remember thinking how stupid it all was, how meaningless. All the money, all the connections, all the carefully cultivated advantages, none of it mattered. I was going to die before I lived. She stopped behind Daniel's chair, her hand resting on the back. And then someone jumped in. Someone who had been driving past, who saw the accident, who didn't hesitate. Someone who dove into that freezing water without thinking about whether they could swim well enough, whether the current was too strong, whether helping us would put his own life at risk. Isabella's hand moved to Daniel's shoulder briefly, then withdrew. He pulled me out first, then went back for my father. Then went back for George, our driver, even though by then George was already gone. He brought all 3 of us to the riverbank. My father was unconscious. I was hypothermic, barely aware. And this man, this stranger, performed CPR on my father until the paramedics arrived, saved his life, saved mine. She moved around the table again, returning to her seat. The paramedics took us away. When we asked about the man who saved us, he was gone. No name, no contact information. My father hired investigators, put out appeals, even offered a reward. Nothing. It was like our rescuer had been a ghost. Isabella sat down, her hands folded carefully in front of her. My father was never the same after that night. Oh, he returned to work, continued building his empire. But something changed. He started asking different questions about legacy, about meaning, about what actually mattered. He started evaluating people differently, not by their portfolios or their pedigrees, but by their character, their willingness to help others even when it cost them something. She looked directly at Marcus Thornhill. My father would have been disgusted by what happened here tonight, by successful, powerful people using their advantages to tear down someone who couldn't fight back, by cruelty disguised as humor, by people who have everything showing contempt for someone who's just trying to survive. Marcus's face had gone from flushed to pale. Isabella, I didn't mean, I don't care what you meant, Isabella cut him off. I care what you did. And what you did was show me exactly who you are when you think there are no consequences. She turned her attention to Gregory Walsh. Emma Chen is fired from your company, effective immediately. Emma's stomach dropped. Gregory started to protest, but Isabella raised a hand. She's fired because I'm hiring her. Triple her current salary, full benefits, reporting directly to me. I need people with competence and dignity, not people who've learned to accept cruelty as the cost of employment. Emma couldn't breathe. Triple her salary. Direct report to Isabella Rowan. It was impossible. It was... Of course, she has to agree, Isabella said, looking at Emma now. It's entirely your choice, Ms. Chen, but the offer stands. Emma looked at Daniel, who had remained silent through Isabella's entire story. He gave her a small nod as if to say, "Your decision, your life." "I accept," Emma heard herself say. "Thank you, Ms. Rowan." "Isabella," the billionaire heiress corrected. "If you're working for me, use my first name in private." She stood once more, gathering her purse with practiced efficiency. "This dinner is over. The waterfront project you were all so excited about? Consider Rowan Industries' participation withdrawn. Marcus, I'm pulling all investments from your firm. Veronica, I'll be moving my portfolio to a different bank. Gregory, I hope this was worth it." The table erupted in protest, but Isabella ignored them all. She moved to where Daniel still stood beside Emma's chair. "Walk with me," she said to him. It wasn't quite a command, wasn't quite a request. Daniel hesitated, looking at Emma. "Will you be all right?" Emma nodded, clutching her tablet like a lifeline. "I think so. Thank you for—" She couldn't find words adequate to express what this stranger had just done for her. "Don't thank me yet," Daniel said with a slight smile. "You're going to work for her now." He gestured at Isabella. "That might be more terrifying than Marcus Thornhill." Isabella's lips twitched. "Fair assessment." She looked at Emma. "Can you find your way out?" "Yes." "Good. I'll have my assistant contact you tomorrow with details. Keep your phone on." Isabella turned and walked toward the exit, her posture regal, leaving chaos in her wake. Daniel followed, his work boots silent on the expensive carpet. As they left, Emma heard Marcus Thornhill slam his hand on the table. Does she understand what she just did? The deals she just destroyed? "I think," James Wu said quietly, "that's exactly what she wanted to do." Emma gathered her things with shaking hands, aware of the eyes on her. Some envious, some resentful, some calculating. She walked out of the grandeur room with her head high, her life completely changed by a man whose name she'd learned only minutes ago. In the hallway outside, Isabella and Daniel stood by the elevators, their conversation low and intense. Emma hesitated, unsure whether to interrupt or slip past them. Isabella noticed her first. "Emma, take the service elevator down. Tell the valet your car is on Rowan Industries. I'll handle it." "Thank you," Emma said again, knowing how inadequate the words were. Isabella nodded, then returned her attention to Daniel as Emma headed toward the service elevator. She could hear fragments of their conversation echoing down the hallway. "Can't just appear after 12 years. Wasn't about you. My father died looking for you." "I know. I'm sorry." The elevator doors closed on their voices, and Emma leaned against the wall, her legs suddenly weak. In the span of 20 minutes, her entire world had shifted. She'd been humiliated, defended, and transformed. All because a man in work boots had placed a glass of water in front of her and said 3 words. "She's with me." Emma looked at her reflection in the polished elevator doors and wondered what exactly she'd just become part of. Whatever it was, whatever complicated history existed between Daniel Cross and Isabella Rowan, it had reached out across 12 years and pulled her into its orbit. The elevator descended, carrying Emma toward a future she couldn't imagine, shaped by a past she didn't understand. Above, in the now empty grandeur room, Marcus Thornhill sat alone at the table, staring at the glass of water that Daniel had placed in front of Emma. It sat there still, untouched, the water perfectly clear and calm. A simple glass of water that had changed everything. The morning had started the way most mornings started in Daniel Cross's life, with the smell of burned toast and the sound of his daughter's laughter cutting through the quiet dawn of their small apartment. "Daddy, it's smoking again," Lily called from the kitchen table, her 7-year-old voice bright with the kind of amusement that only children could find in domestic disasters. Daniel rushed from the bathroom, still buttoning his work shirt, to find their ancient toaster living up to its reputation. He unplugged it quickly, waving away the thin stream of smoke with a dish towel, while Lily giggled behind her hands. "That's the 3rd time this week," she said, her dark eyes dancing with mirth. Those eyes were her mother's eyes, the only part of Sarah that Daniel saw every single day, a gift and an ache all at once. "Then I guess it's cereal morning," Daniel replied, pulling the blackened bread from the toaster with a fork. He tossed it in the trash and grabbed the box of store-brand cereal from the cabinet above the sink. Their kitchen was barely large enough for two people to stand in comfortably, with counters that had seen better decades and cabinets that didn't quite close properly anymore. But it was clean, and it was theirs, and that had to be enough. Lily was already pouring milk into her bowl with the careful concentration she applied to everything. She wore her school uniform, a blue polo shirt that was getting too small and khaki pants that Daniel had let out twice already. She'd need new clothes soon, which meant extra shifts, which meant less time with her. The mathematics of single parenthood were relentless and unforgiving. "Are you fixing the big building again today?" Lily asked, her spoon creating careful patterns in her cereal. "The Sterling Heights Hotel, yeah," Daniel confirmed, pouring coffee into a travel mug that had a crack running down one side. He'd been meaning to replace it for months, but kept forgetting. "They've got a banquet tonight, so I need to make sure all the mechanical systems are running perfectly." "What's a banquet?" "It's like a fancy dinner party for rich people," Daniel explained, sitting down across from her with his own bowl of cereal. Their table was small, salvaged from a curb 3 years ago and refinished by hand. 2 chairs, 2 place settings, 2 lives built carefully in the spaces between what they'd lost and what they were trying to become. Lily considered this information seriously. "Do they have better food than us?" Daniel smiled despite the pang in his chest. "Probably fancier food, but I bet it's not as good as our Saturday pancakes." "Nothing's as good as Saturday pancakes," Lily agreed with absolute certainty. She took another bite of cereal, then looked up at him with sudden concern. "Will you be home for dinner?" This was the question Daniel dreaded most. "I'll try, sweetheart. But if the job runs late, Mrs. Patterson will give you dinner, okay?" Mrs. Patterson was their neighbor, a retired teacher who watched Lily after school when Daniel's work schedule ran long. She was kind and reliable and charged far less than she should, probably because she understood what it meant to stretch a dollar until it screamed. Daniel paid her what he could and made up the difference by fixing things in her apartment. Leaky faucets, stuck windows, the temperamental furnace that kept her warm through winter. "Mrs. Patterson makes mushy vegetables," Lily said, but without real complaint. She'd learned early not to be picky, another lesson Daniel wished she didn't have to know. "Then I'll definitely try to be home," Daniel promised, reaching across the table to tap her nose gently. "We can have grilled cheese and tomato soup. Deal?" "Deal," Lily said, her smile returning full force. They finished breakfast in comfortable quiet, the kind of silence that spoke of familiarity and trust. Daniel washed the dishes while Lily packed her school bag, checking twice that she had her homework and her library book. She was meticulous about these things, more responsible than most 7-year-olds, and Daniel felt that familiar mixture of pride and sadness that came from knowing his daughter had grown up faster than she should have. "Ready?" he asked, grabbing his keys and the leather notebook he always carried, worn smooth by years of handling. Lily nodded, shouldering her backpack. She took his hand as they left the apartment, her small fingers warm and trusting in his. They walked down 3 flights of stairs. The elevator had been broken for 2 months, and out into the morning streets of a city just beginning to wake. Their neighborhood wasn't dangerous exactly, but it wasn't safe either. It existed in that uncertain space where people worked hard, struggled harder, and tried not to notice when their neighbors disappeared in the night, evicted or fleeing or simply giving up. Daniel had lived here for 8 years, ever since Sarah's death had left him alone with an infant daughter and a grief so vast he'd thought it might swallow them both. He'd survived. They'd survived. But survival wasn't the same as thriving, and Daniel was constantly aware of how thin the margin was between their current stability and complete disaster. They reached Lily's elementary school 15 minutes later, joining the stream of parents and children flowing through the front gates. The school was old but well-maintained, with teachers who cared more than they were paid to, and a principal who knew every student by name. It was one of the reasons Daniel had chosen this neighborhood, despite its other drawbacks. "Have a good day, Princess," Daniel said, kneeling down to Lily's level. "Remember, if I'm late, Mrs. Patterson will pick you up." "I know, Daddy," Lily said, but she hugged him anyway, fierce and quick. "Fix the building good." "I always do," Daniel replied, watching as she ran to join her friends near the entrance. She looked back once, waving, and he waved back, keeping his smile in place until she disappeared inside. Then he stood, checked his watch, and headed for the bus stop. His truck had died 2 weeks ago, and the repair costs were more than the vehicle was worth. He'd been taking public transportation since then, adding an extra hour to his commute, but saving money he desperately needed for Lily's growing list of expenses. The bus was crowded with other early morning workers, housekeepers and line cooks and security guards, people whose labor kept the city running but who remained invisible to those who benefited from their work. Daniel found a seat near the back and pulled out his leather notebook, not to read, but simply to hold, a talisman against the day ahead. The notebook had been a gift, though calling it a gift felt inadequate for what it represented. Inside its worn pages were notes written in another man's hand, words that had once meant hope and possibility, and a future Daniel had ultimately walked away from. He kept the notebook anyway, unable to throw it away even after all these years, even though looking at it brought back memories he'd tried hard to bury. The bus lurched through traffic, carrying Daniel across the city from the neighborhood where people like him lived to the district where people like Isabella Rowan shaped the world according to their visions. The contrast was stark, buildings growing taller and cleaner, cars becoming newer and more expensive, even the sunlight seeming somehow brighter once they crossed the invisible boundary between struggle and success. Daniel got off at the Sterling Heights Hotel, a tower of glass and steel that catered to the wealthiest clients in the city. He'd been working here for 3 years, part of the maintenance crew that kept the building's complex systems running smoothly. It was steady work, union work, with benefits that covered Lily's health care and a wage that almost covered their bills. He entered through the service entrance, nodding to Jimmy, the security guard who worked the morning shift. "Big night tonight, Danny boy," Jimmy said, scanning Daniel's ID badge. "Some kind of investment dinner in the grandeur room. They're paying overtime for anyone who stays late to handle emergencies." "I'll stay," Daniel said immediately. Overtime meant extra money, which meant maybe he could get Lily those new school clothes before the month ended. "Figured you would," Jimmy replied with a knowing smile. "You got a kid to feed. I remember those days." Daniel headed down to the basement mechanical room, where the hotel's heating, cooling, and electrical systems lived in a maze of pipes and wires that most people never saw or thought about. This was his domain, a place where problems had concrete solutions and hard work produced visible results. He understood systems, could diagnose issues by sound or smell, could coax failing equipment into lasting just a little longer. His coworkers were already there, Martinez, Chen, and Robertson, men who'd become something like friends through shared shifts and common struggles. They nodded greetings as Daniel grabbed his tool belt and checked the work orders for the day. "You hear about the dinner tonight?" Martinez asked, adjusting his glasses as he reviewed a schematic. "Apparently it's some big-shot investor thing. They're expecting us to make sure everything's perfect." "When isn't it perfect?" Chen replied, though they all knew the answer. The hotel was old, for all its luxury, and old buildings had old problems that required constant attention. They worked through the morning, checking systems and making small repairs, the kind of preventive maintenance that kept disasters from happening, but that no one ever noticed or appreciated. Daniel lost himself in the work, in the meditative repetition of testing and adjusting, his hands performing tasks they'd done 1,000 times, while his mind wandered to safer subjects. What to make Lily for dinner, whether they could afford a trip to the zoo this weekend, how much longer their apartment's heating would hold out before needing expensive repairs. Lunch was a sandwich from his lunchbox, eaten in the break room while Martinez complained about his landlord, and Chen showed pictures of his new grandson. These were Daniel's people, working-class men who understood that dignity came from doing your job well, even when no one was watching, even when the rewards were minimal. "You ever think about doing something else?" Robertson asked suddenly, looking at Daniel with the kind of directness that came from years of working side by side. "You're smart enough. Could probably get certified in something that pays better." Daniel had thought about it, often, but certification required time and money he didn't have, and it would mean taking risks at a point in his life where stability mattered more than advancement. "Maybe when Lily's older," Daniel said, which was the same answer he always gave, the same promise he'd been making to himself for years. Robertson nodded, understanding all the things Daniel didn't say. They all had dreams they'd deferred, ambitions they'd sacrificed on the altar of immediate necessity. That was the reality of their lives, and complaining about it changed nothing. The afternoon passed in similar rhythm, Routine tasks punctuated by small crises, a thermostat malfunction in the East Wing, a mysterious leak in the executive suite, a circuit breaker that kept tripping for no apparent reason. Daniel handled each problem with patient competence, aware that invisible work was still essential work, that someone had to care about the details even when no one else would. At 5 o'clock, most of the day shift headed home. Daniel stayed, along with Chen and a skeleton crew, prepared to handle any emergencies during the evening's big event. They could hear the activity upstairs as catering staff arrived and event coordinators barked instructions, the hotel transforming itself for the kind of evening Daniel saw only from the maintenance perspective, the behind-the-scenes machinery that made luxury possible. "I'm going to do a final walkthrough," Daniel told Chen around 6:30. "Make sure the grandeur room's climate control is stable." "Check the backup generator too," Chen replied. "Weather report says possible storms later." Daniel nodded and headed upstairs, using the service stairs that allowed staff to move through the building without being seen by guests. The grandeur room was on the 20th floor, and he could hear voices and laughter as he approached, the sound of people for whom this kind of evening was normal, expected, unremarkable. He paused outside the service entrance, checking the environmental controls on his tablet. Temperature was perfect, humidity controlled, air circulation optimal. Everything was running exactly as it should be. He should head back downstairs, return to the mechanical room, wait for actual problems instead of looking for them. But something made him hesitate. The laughter from inside the grandeur room had an edge to it, a quality he recognized from experience. The particular cruelty that came from people who felt entitled to treat others as entertainment. Daniel had heard that sound before, had been the target of it, once upon a time, in a life he'd tried to leave behind. He'd learned to walk away from it, to understand that engaging with casual cruelty only gave it more power. But then he heard a woman's voice, young and trying hard to sound professional, saying something he couldn't quite make out, and he heard the response, mocking laughter, words meant to tear down rather than build up, the sound of people enjoying someone else's humiliation. Daniel's hand tightened on his tablet. It wasn't his business. The woman inside that room, whoever she was, wasn't his responsibility. He had a daughter depending on him, a job he couldn't afford to lose, a life carefully constructed to avoid exactly this kind of complication. He should walk away. He started to walk away. Then he heard a man's voice, loud and self-satisfied, saying something about knowing your place, about appearance and worth, about the difference between people like us and people like you. Daniel stopped walking. He thought about Lily, about the world she was growing up in, about what kind of man he wanted her father to be. He thought about Sarah, who'd never let cruelty pass unchallenged, who'd believed that silence in the face of injustice was its own kind of betrayal. He thought about the notebook in his pocket and the man who'd written in it, a man who'd once told Daniel that character revealed itself in moments when no one was watching, when there was nothing to gain and everything to lose. Daniel turned around and walked toward the grandeur room's service entrance. Meanwhile, across the city in a penthouse office that overlooked downtown, Isabella Rowan stood before floor-to-ceiling windows and tried to remember why any of this mattered. The waterfront project files were spread across her desk. Projections and proposals, architectural renderings, and financial models, everything needed to make an informed decision about $1 billion investment. It was the kind of deal her father would have loved, complex enough to be interesting, profitable enough to be worthwhile, visible enough to make a statement about Rowan Industries' continued dominance in the market. Isabella had been reviewing these files for weeks, preparing for tonight's dinner where she'd announce her decision to the investment group that had been courting her participation. Everything was ready. The presentation was perfect. The deal was sound. So why did she feel nothing but emptiness? Her reflection in the window showed a woman in her late 20s who looked older, her dark hair already threaded with silver that she refused to dye, her eyes holding the kind of exhaustion that came from years of carrying weight that never lightened. She wore a designer suit that cost more than most people made in a month and felt like armor that no longer quite fit. "Ms. Rowan," her assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Your car will be ready in 30 minutes. "Thank you, Jennifer," Isabella replied, her voice automatically shifting into the professional tone she'd perfected over years of practice. She turned away from the window, forcing herself to focus on the task at hand. Tonight's dinner was important for reasons beyond the waterfront project. Marcus Thornhill and his associates represented the kind of old money network that still held significant power in the city. Maintaining good relationships with them was strategic, even when she found their company tiresome and their values questionable. Isabella gathered the files mechanically, her movements efficient and precise. Everything about her life was efficient and precise, carefully managed to avoid the messy complications that came from genuine emotion or authentic connection. She'd learned that lesson early, had it reinforced by her father's death 3 years ago, and had built her empire on the understanding that sentiment was a luxury successful people couldn't afford. Her phone buzzed with a text from Veronica Sterling, one of tonight's attendees. "Looking forward to the announcement. This project will be transformative." Isabella typed back a brief confirmation, professional and non-committal. Veronica was useful, well-connected, ruthless in negotiations, effective at navigating the political complexities of high-level finance. She was also insufferable, prone to casual cruelty disguised as humor, and represented everything Isabella had come to despise about her own world. But business was business, and Isabella had learned to separate personal feelings from professional necessities. She moved to her private bathroom, checking her appearance with critical eyes. The midnight blue dress had been selected by her stylist, appropriate for the evening's tone, serious but not somber, elegant but not ostentatious. Her makeup was flawless, her hair arranged in a style that suggested effortless sophistication while actually requiring significant time and skill. Isabella barely recognized herself anymore. Somewhere between 17 and 29, between the girl who'd almost drowned and the woman who commanded billions, she'd lost track of who she actually was beneath all the careful construction. Her hand moved unconsciously to the silver necklace at her throat, her fingers tracing the small pendant that never left her skin. It was a simple piece, inelegant compared to the jewelry she could afford, but she wore it always, a talisman from a night she couldn't forget no matter how hard she tried. 12 years. 12 years since freezing water and strong hands and a voice cutting through her panic, telling her to hold on, to keep fighting, to stay alive. 12 years since her father had woken in a hospital bed and immediately demanded to know who'd saved them. 12 years since they'd learned that their rescuer had vanished without a trace, leaving nothing behind but questions and an aching sense of incompletion. Her father had never stopped looking. Thomas Rowan had spent the last 12 years of his life trying to find the man who'd jumped into that river, had hired investigators and made public appeals and offered rewards that went unclaimed. He'd died 3 years ago, still wondering, still searching, still unable to understand why someone would save their lives and then disappear as if the act meant nothing. Isabella understood, though she'd never told her father. She understood because she'd spent 12 years rebuilding herself from the frightened girl who'd needed saving into a woman who would never need rescue again. Strength meant independence. Power meant never being vulnerable. Success meant never depending on anyone else's courage or compassion. The man who'd saved them had understood that lesson already. He'd known that accepting gratitude meant accepting obligation, and he'd chosen to walk away rather than be bound by someone else's sense of debt. Isabella respected that choice, even as it haunted her. "Ms. Rowan?" Jennifer's voice again. "Your car is here." "Coming," Isabella replied, gathering her purse and taking one last look at the woman in the mirror. Polished, professional, perfectly controlled. The mask was firmly in place. The drive to the Sterling Heights Hotel took 20 minutes through evening traffic. Isabella sat in the back of her town car, reviewing notes on her tablet while her driver navigated the crowded streets. She'd trained herself to use every moment productively, to never waste time on contemplation or reflection when there was always more work to be done. But tonight, her concentration kept slipping. She found herself staring out the window instead of reading, watching the city pass by. The transition from commercial districts to residential neighborhoods, from wealth to poverty and back again, all existing side by side in careful ignorance of each other. "Ms. Rowan?" Her driver's voice interrupted her distraction. "We've arrived." Isabella looked up to see the Sterling Heights Hotel rising before her, all glass and steel and carefully maintained luxury. She'd been here dozens of times for various events, knew the layout intimately, could navigate its corridors in her sleep. It was just another venue, tonight just another obligation. She stepped from the car with practiced grace, ignoring the doorman's greeting, moving through the lobby with the confidence of someone who belonged everywhere and nowhere. The elevator ride to the 20th floor was smooth and silent, giving her a moment to settle the last pieces of her professional persona into place. The grandeur room doors stood open, revealing the gathering already in progress. Isabella paused just outside, taking in the scene with the analytical detachment she'd perfected. 23 people, most of whom she knew by reputation if not personally. Power brokers and deal makers, people who shaped markets and influenced policy, who believed their wealth entitled them to reshape reality according to their preferences. Her people, in theory. The world she'd been born into and had learned to dominate. Isabella straightened her shoulders and walked in, immediately becoming the center of attention as conversations paused and heads turned. She distributed greetings with strategic precision, warm enough to be appropriate, distant enough to maintain authority, playing the role that circumstances had assigned her. Marcus Thornhill approached first, his handshake too firm, his smile too wide. "Isabella, wonderful to see you. We're all eager to hear your decision on the waterfront project." "All in good time, Marcus," Isabella replied smoothly, extracting her hand from his grip. "Let's enjoy the evening first." She moved through the room, exchanging pleasantries and deflecting questions, maintaining the delicate balance between accessibility and aloofness that kept people both interested and uncertain. It was exhausting work, this constant performance, but she'd done it so long that it had become second nature. Dinner was announced, and they took their seats around the long table. Isabella sat at the head, the position of authority but also isolation, able to observe everyone while truly connecting with no one. She half listened to the conversations around her, her mind already planning the presentation she'd give after the meal, calculating angles and responses, playing the chess game that never ended. Then she noticed the young woman at the far end of the table. The woman was young, maybe mid-20s, wearing a simple black dress that clearly wasn't expensive. She sat quietly, taking notes on a tablet, trying to make herself invisible in a room full of people who'd never learned that particular skill. There was something familiar about her posture, about the careful way she held herself, the visible effort to meet impossible standards. Isabella saw herself in that woman, or at least the ghost of who she'd once been. Uncertain, trying too hard, believing that competence and effort would be enough. Then Marcus Thornhill's voice cut across the conversation, loud and mocking, and Isabella's attention sharpened as she realized he was addressing the young woman. The conversation that followed made Isabella's stomach tighten with recognition and disgust. Casual cruelty dressed up as humor, powerful people amusing themselves at someone else's expense. The particular violence that came from those who'd never been vulnerable targeting someone who had no way to fight back. Isabella should have stopped it immediately, should have used her authority to shut down the harassment before it escalated. But she hesitated, held back by the same learned detachment that had kept her safe for so long. The understanding that intervening would be seen as weakness, as excessive emotion, as the kind of unprofessional behavior that undermined authority. So she watched, hating herself for watching, as the situation escalated and the young woman's humiliation deepened. Then the glass of water appeared. Then the man in work boots spoke 3 words that shattered everything. Then Isabella looked up and saw a face she'd spent 12 years trying to find, standing calmly beside a stranger's chair as if he'd been summoned from her memories by the sheer force of the moment's injustice. Daniel Cross. The man who'd saved her life, the man who'd disappeared, the man her father had died still looking for. Standing in her dining room, wearing work clothes and tired eyes, as if 12 years meant nothing, as if time hadn't passed, as if the question that had haunted her entire adult life could be answered simply by his unexpected presence. Isabella felt the careful control she'd spent years building crack down the middle, felt emotions she'd locked away flooding back with devastating force. She stood without conscious decision, her hand moving to the necklace at her throat, the only piece of jewelry she'd been wearing that night 12 years ago, the only thing she'd kept from the girl she'd been before the water and the cold and the stranger who'd refused to let her die. "Daniel Cross," she heard herself say, her voice barely steady. "You said your name is Daniel Cross?" And in that moment, as recognition flashed across his face, as their eyes met across a room full of people who suddenly didn't matter at all, Isabella understood that some debts transcended time, that some connections couldn't be severed by distance or choice, that some moments changed everything regardless of how carefully you'd tried to prevent exactly that kind of transformation. The past she'd tried to leave behind had just walked back into her life, and nothing would ever be the same again. The elevator descended in silence so complete that Daniel could hear Isabella's breathing, quick and shallow, the kind of rhythm that came from barely controlled emotion. They stood on opposite sides of the small space, the polished brass walls reflecting their images back at them. A billionaire heiress in a dress that cost thousands, and a maintenance worker in boots that had seen better years. The contrast was almost absurd, except that 12 years ago, those distinctions hadn't mattered at all. "You have 30 seconds before these doors open," Isabella said, her voice tight with suppressed fury. "Tell me why you disappeared." Daniel kept his eyes on the descending floor numbers. "I had a daughter who needed me more than your father needed to repay a debt." "That's not an answer. That's an excuse." "It's the only answer I have." The elevator doors opened onto the lobby, and Isabella stepped out with the kind of controlled grace that came from years of being watched. Daniel followed, aware of the stares from hotel staff and guests, the visible confusion about why Isabella Rowan was leaving her own event with a man who clearly didn't belong in her world. "My car," Isabella said to her driver, who'd been waiting near the entrance. The man nodded and pulled the town car around immediately, understanding from her tone that questions would not be welcome. They climbed into the back seat, and Isabella gave her driver an address that made Daniel's stomach tighten. She'd just given the location of his apartment building. She knew where he lived. "You've been watching me," Daniel said quietly. "For 8 years," Isabella confirmed without apology. "Ever since my investigators finally found a Daniel Cross who matched the general description from that night. A maintenance worker with a daughter, living in the East District, keeping his head down and avoiding any situation that might put him in a database or a photograph. You were very careful. It took them 4 years just to confirm it was you." Daniel closed his eyes briefly. "Why didn't you approach me?" "Because my father was dying and he made me promise something." Isabella's voice wavered slightly, the first crack in her composure. "He made me promise that if we ever found you, I wouldn't force contact. He said you'd made a choice to walk away, and we had to respect that choice, even if we didn't understand it. Your father was a better man than most." "My father spent 12 years looking for you," Isabella said, and now the anger was fully present in her voice. 12 years wondering why someone would save his life and then vanish. 12 years of investigators and appeals and sleepless nights. He died still wondering, still hoping you'd come forward, still believing there had to be a reason good enough to justify what you did. Daniel turned to look at her directly for the first time since entering the car. "There was a reason." "But then tell me," Isabella demanded. "You owe me that much." "I don't owe you anything," Daniel replied, but his voice was gentle, not cruel. "That's the point. Your father wanted to owe me something, wanted to repay me, wanted to make me part of his world, and I couldn't accept that. Not because I didn't appreciate it, but because I knew what it would cost." "What would it cost?" Isabella's hands clenched in her lap. "Money? We had plenty. Opportunity? We could have given you anything. Education, position, connections." "My identity," Daniel interrupted. "It would have cost me who I was, who I needed to be for my daughter." The car moved through evening traffic, carrying them toward a neighborhood Isabella Rowan had probably never visited, where her wealth would stand out like a beacon and her power would mean nothing to people fighting daily battles just to survive. "Explain that," Isabella said after a long silence. "Make me understand." Daniel reached into his jacket and pulled out the leather notebook, the one he carried everywhere, the one that held words he'd read 1,000 times but never fully escaped. He handed it to Isabella. She took it carefully, her fingers tracing the worn cover. "What is this?" "Open it." Isabella did, and Daniel watched her face as she saw her father's handwriting on the first page, strong and decisive. The script of a man who'd been accustomed to making declarations that became reality. "To Daniel Cross," Isabella read aloud, her voice catching on her father's name. "In gratitude for a life saved and a debt that can never be fully repaid. Whatever you need, whatever you want, whatever dreams you carry, Consider them already fulfilled. You have given us tomorrow. Let us give you forever. Thomas Rowan. She looked up at Daniel, tears now visible in her eyes. He wrote this? In the hospital, the night after the accident, Daniel confirmed. He had a nurse bring me to his room. Your mother was there too, do you remember? She'd flown in from Paris. Isabella nodded slowly. I barely remember anything from those days. The hypothermia, the shock. It's all fragments. Your father told me he wanted to thank me properly. Said he was a wealthy man and I'd given him the most valuable thing possible. More time with his daughter. He wanted to know what I needed, what I wanted from life. And when I couldn't answer, when I just stood there in wet clothes still shaking from the cold, he wrote that. Daniel gestured to the notebook. He told me to keep it, to think about it, to come back when I knew what I wanted. So you took it and disappeared, Isabella said bitterly. So I took it and realized I couldn't accept it, Daniel corrected. Keep reading. Isabella turned the pages, her expression shifting as she read entries in different handwriting, Daniel's own, written over the weeks and months following the accident. They were scattered thoughts, questions posed to himself, arguments conducted in the lonely hours after his infant daughter had finally fallen asleep. Who would I become if I accepted? Isabella read from one entry. Thomas Rowan saved himself by building an empire. I saved him by jumping in water. These are not equivalent actions requiring equivalent responses. I cannot let him remake me in the image of what he thinks I should be. She continued reading, her fingers moving faster through the pages, absorbing words written by a younger Daniel who'd struggled with a choice that most people would have considered obvious. Sarah died today, Isabella read from an entry dated 3 weeks after the accident, and her voice broke completely. Complications from childbirth. The doctor said there was nothing anyone could do. I have a daughter named Lily who will never know her mother. I have a notebook full of promises from a man who thinks he owes me everything. I have a choice to make between accepting help that would change my life and maintaining an identity that's all I have left of who I was before the water and the dying and the impossible weight of being someone's savior. Isabella closed the notebook carefully, her tears falling freely now. Your wife died? 3 weeks after I pulled you from the river, Daniel confirmed. She'd been sick during the pregnancy but hiding it, not wanting to worry me. By the time the doctors understood how serious it was, there was nothing they could do. She died 6 hours after giving birth to Lily. I'm so sorry, Isabella whispered. Your father came to the funeral, Daniel said. I didn't invite him, didn't even know he knew about Sarah's death, but he came anyway. Sat in the back of the church, didn't approach me afterward, just sent flowers and a note saying he understood if I needed time before making any decisions about his offer. That sounds like him, Isabella said softly. He was a good man, Daniel agreed, but he was also a man who solved problems with resources, who believed money and influence could fix anything. And I knew with absolute certainty that if I accepted his help, I would stop being Daniel Cross and become Daniel Cross, the man Thomas Rowan saved in return. My daughter would grow up in a world where her father's identity was defined by one night, one action, one debt that could never really be repaid. The car pulled to a stop outside Daniel's apartment building, a 5-story structure that had been built in the 70s and showed every year of its age. Graffiti marked the lower walls, and 2 of the exterior lights were burned out. It was the kind of building that people from Isabella's world drove past without seeing, where lives were lived in quiet desperation and small victories. This is where you've been, Isabella said, looking up at the building. For 8 years, while I've been in boardrooms and penthouses, you've been here. Raising my daughter, Daniel said, working honest jobs, building a life that's mine, not a gift from someone else. Isabella's driver opened her door, but she didn't move. I need to understand something. That night, upstairs in the grandeur room, you didn't know Emma Chen, didn't have any connection to her. Why did you intervene? Daniel was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. I heard what was happening, heard people treating another person like she was worthless because she didn't have their advantages. And I thought about Lily, about the world she's growing up in, about what kind of man I want her father to be. He looked directly at Isabella. I thought about your father too, about what he would have done. Thomas Rowan had power, and he used it to protect people. I don't have power, but I have a voice, and sometimes that's enough. It was more than enough, Isabella said. Isabella, you changed everything up there. People who've never been challenged, never been told they were wrong, you made them see themselves clearly. You made them see themselves clearly, Daniel corrected. I just gave you a reason to act. Isabella shook her head slowly. No. You reminded me of something I'd forgotten. My father used to say that wealth without character was just decorated emptiness, that power without compassion was just legalized cruelty. I'd lost sight of that, been so focused on maintaining the empire he built that I forgot why he built it in the first place. She opened the car door and stepped out onto the sidewalk, looking up at the building where Daniel lived. Can I meet her, your daughter? Daniel's protective instincts flared immediately. I don't think that's a good idea. Please, Isabella said, and the word came out raw, stripped of all her usual control. I just want to see what you chose instead of my father's world. I want to understand what was worth more than everything we could have given you. Daniel studied her face, seeing genuine emotion beneath the careful mask, seeing the girl who'd almost drowned still living somewhere inside the woman who commanded billions. Against his better judgment, against every instinct that warned him to maintain separation between his two worlds, he nodded. Okay, but just for a few minutes, and if she seems uncomfortable, you leave immediately. Agreed, Isabella said quickly. They walked into the building together, an odd pairing that drew curious glances from the few residents they passed. The elevator was broken, as usual, so they took the stairs to the third floor. Daniel's apartment was at the end of the hallway, marked by a door that had been painted so many times the wood grain had disappeared entirely. He unlocked it and stepped inside, calling out immediately. Lily, I'm home, and we have a visitor. The apartment was exactly what Isabella had expected, and somehow more affecting for its ordinariness. The furniture was old but clean, arranged with care in a space too small for comfort, but made livable through attention to detail. Children's drawings covered one wall, bright crayon pictures that showed a child's perspective on the world. A small kitchen table held the remains of an after-school snack, and school books were stacked neatly on a corner desk. Lily emerged from what must have been her bedroom, wearing pajamas covered in stars. She was small for 7, with her father's dark hair and eyes that held intelligence and curiosity in equal measure. She stopped when she saw Isabella, her expression shifting to polite confusion. Lily, this is Ms. Rowan, Daniel said gently. She's someone I knew a long time ago, before you were born. Miss Rowan, this is my daughter Lily. Hello, Lily said carefully, with the courtesy that had clearly been taught and practiced. It's nice to meet you. Isabella seemed unable to speak for a moment, her composure completely shattered by the sight of this small person who represented everything Daniel had chosen over her father's offers. When she finally found her voice, it was barely above a whisper. Hello, Lily. You can call me Isabella. Lily looked to her father for permission, and Daniel nodded slightly. Isabella, Lily repeated, testing out the informality. That's a pretty name, like a princess. Thank you, Isabella managed, and a tear escaped down her cheek despite her efforts to maintain control. You have a beautiful home. Lily beamed with pride. Daddy and I fixed it up together. He let me pick the paint color for my room. Do you want to see it? Lily, Ms. Rowan can't stay long, Daniel started, but Isabella interrupted. I'd love to see your room, she said, if that's okay with your father. Daniel nodded again, and Lily took Isabella's hand with the unconscious trust of a child who'd been taught that most people were fundamentally good. She led Isabella down the short hallway to a bedroom that was barely large enough for a twin bed and a small dresser, but had been painted a cheerful yellow that caught the evening light. I picked yellow because it's happy, Lily explained seriously. Daddy said I could pick any color except black because black would make the room too dark. Isabella looked around the small space, taking in the carefully arranged books on a makeshift shelf, the drawings taped to the walls, the stuffed animals lined up on the bed with obvious care. It's perfect, she said, and meant it. You and your father did an amazing job. Daddy can fix anything, Lily said with absolute confidence. He fixes buildings for work, but he also fixed our toaster when it broke, and he fixed Mrs. Patterson's door when it got stuck, and he fixed my favorite book when the pages came out. He sounds very talented, Isabella said, looking back at Daniel, who stood in the doorway watching this interaction with visible concern. "He's the best daddy in the world," Lily declared. Then, with the characteristic subject change of children, she asked, "Are you a princess?" "You look like you could be a princess." Isabella laughed despite her tears. "No, sweetheart. I'm just a businesswoman. I run a company." "What kind of company?" "We make buildings, kind of like what your daddy helps maintain. We also invest in other companies, help them grow and create jobs for people." Lily considered this seriously. "So you help people?" "I try to," Isabella said, though the words felt hollow given how she'd spent most of her adult life. "Though I think your daddy is better at helping people than I am." "Daddy helps everyone," Lily agreed. "He says that's what good people do. They help even when it's hard." Isabella's eyes met Daniel's across the small room, and something passed between them. Recognition, understanding, a shared acknowledgement of the choice he'd made and the life it had created. This apartment was tiny, this neighborhood was struggling, this existence was precarious in ways Isabella's world never touched. But it was also filled with love and purpose, and the kind of genuine connection that all her wealth had never purchased. "Lily, it's getting close to bedtime," Daniel said gently. "Why don't you brush your teeth while I walk Ms. Rowan out?" "Okay, Daddy." Lily turned to Isabella with sudden shyness. "Will you come visit again?" Isabella looked to Daniel, who gave the slightest shake of his head. "Maybe someday," Isabella said carefully. "But right now, I think your daddy and I have some grown-up things to discuss." "Grown-up things are usually boring," Lily observed with a child's wisdom, then hugged her father quickly before heading to the bathroom. Daniel and Isabella returned to the small living room, the space somehow feeling even smaller now that they were alone again. Isabella stood in the center of the room, turning slowly as if trying to memorize every detail. "She's beautiful," Isabella said finally. "You've raised her well." "I've done my best," Daniel replied. "It hasn't always been easy." "But it's been yours," Isabella said. "This life, these choices, this struggle, it's all authentically yours. That's what you meant, isn't it? That's what you couldn't accept from my father." "Yes," Daniel confirmed. "Your father would have given me everything except the one thing I needed most. The knowledge that whatever I built through my own effort. That whatever my daughter had, she had because I worked for it, not because someone else owed me a debt." Isabella sank onto the worn couch, her expensive dress at odds with the faded upholstery. "I've spent 12 years being angry at you. Angry that you left, angry that you didn't let us help, angry that my father died still searching. But now I understand. You weren't rejecting us. You were protecting yourself, protecting her." "Your father understood too," Daniel said quietly. "Why do you think he told you not to force contact if you found me? He knew what I'd chosen and why. He just couldn't stop hoping I might change my mind." "He left something for you," Isabella said abruptly. "In his will. I wasn't supposed to tell you unless you came forward on your own, but given the circumstances—" She paused, gathering her thoughts. "He set up a trust fund. Not for you, for Lily. It can't be touched until she's 18, and even then, only for education or starting a business. He wanted her to have opportunities without taking away your right to raise her as you saw fit." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I can't accept that." "You don't have a choice," Isabella said. "It's already done. The trust exists whether you acknowledge it or not. My father made sure it was legally binding. He also made sure it couldn't be accessed or altered by anyone, including me. When Lily turns 18, she'll be notified of its existence. What she does with it will be entirely her decision." "How much?" Daniel asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. "Enough to pay for any college in the country," Isabella replied, "and enough left over to start a life without debt." Daniel moved to the window, looking out at the neighborhood where he'd raised his daughter, the streets he knew by heart, the world he'd chosen instead of the one Thomas Rowan had offered. He should have let it go. "He couldn't," Isabella said. "You saved his life. That meant something to him. It changed him, made him question how he'd been living, what he'd been prioritizing. The last years of his life, he was different. More present, more engaged with things that actually mattered. He started programs to help working families, funded scholarships for kids who couldn't afford college, used his influence to push for better wages and working conditions. He did all of that because one night, a stranger jumped into freezing water and reminded him that character had nothing to do with bank accounts. Daniel turned back to face her. I didn't do it to change him. I did it because people were dying. I know, Isabella said. That's exactly why it changed him. She stood, smoothing her dress with hands that still trembled slightly. I should go. I've intruded enough. What will you do? Daniel asked. About the investors, the deals, all the people who saw what happened tonight? Isabella's expression hardened, the businesswoman reasserting control. I'm going to finish what you started. Marcus Thornhill and his associates have been operating unchallenged for too long, using their positions to diminish others, treating decency like it's a luxury instead of a baseline requirement. They're going to learn that my father's daughter remembers his lessons about character and power. You're going to make enemies, Daniel warned. I already have enemies, Isabella replied. At least these will be enemies I earned by standing for something that matters. She moved toward the door, then paused. The job offer for Emma Chen was genuine. I meant what I said. If she's brave enough to accept humiliation in pursuit of her career, she's brave enough to handle working for me. She'll accept, Daniel said with certainty. People like Emma, like me, we recognize opportunity when it comes. We just need someone to actually offer it. Isabella nodded, her hand on the doorknob. Can I ask you one more thing? Yes. Do you ever regret it, choosing this life instead of what my father offered? Daniel looked back toward Lily's room, where he could hear her singing to herself as she got ready for bed. Every single day, he said honestly, and not once. Isabella smiled, genuine and sad at the same time. That's the most honest answer anyone's ever given me. She opened the door, then turned back one final time. Thank you for letting me meet her, for letting me see what my father's money couldn't buy. Your father's money could have bought a lot of things, Daniel said, just not the things that matter most. After Isabella left, Daniel stood in the quiet apartment, the leather notebook still in his hand, feeling the weight of a past that refused to stay buried, and a future that had just become infinitely more complicated. He could hear Lily still singing in her room, unaware that her life had just been touched by forces beyond her understanding, that choices made before her birth had just reasserted themselves in ways that would shape her future. He thought about Thomas Rowan, dying 3 years ago, still wondering, still hoping, still unable to let go of the debt he felt he owed. He thought about Isabella, spending 12 years being angry at a man she'd never truly known, only to discover that anger had been masking a deeper wound, the loss of certainty, the realization that being saved didn't guarantee understanding. Most of all, he thought about the moment upstairs in the grandeur room, when he'd heard cruelty in progress and made a choice to step forward. That choice had unlocked everything else. The confrontation, the recognition, the past colliding with the present in ways neither he nor Isabella could have predicted. Daddy? Lily appeared in the hallway, her toothbrush still in hand. Was that lady a friend of yours? Sort of, Daniel said carefully. She's someone I helped a long time ago, and she wanted to thank me. Lily processed this with a child's logic. She seemed sad. She was, Daniel confirmed. Sometimes thanking people makes them sad because it reminds them of hard things that happened. But you made her feel better, right? Because you always make people feel better. Daniel crossed to his daughter and knelt down to her level. I tried, but some people carry sadness that doesn't go away just because someone was kind to them. Lily hugged him spontaneously, her small arms fierce around his neck. I'm glad you're my daddy, she whispered, even if we don't have a lot of money like that lady probably does. Me too, princess, Daniel whispered back. Me too. After he tucked Lily into bed and turned out her light, Daniel returned to the living room and sat on the couch, where Isabella had sat, the leather notebook open on his lap. He read through the entries again, words written by a younger version of himself who'd struggled with an impossible choice, and ultimately chosen pride over pragmatism, identity over opportunity. He still believed he'd made the right choice. But sitting in an apartment that was too small, in a neighborhood that was too hard, raising a daughter who deserved better than the constant financial stress that defined their existence, It was harder to maintain that certainty than it had been 12 years ago, when grief and determination had felt like enough. Thomas Rowan's words stared up at him from the page. Consider them already fulfilled. The promise of a dead man to a living one, binding across years and circumstances, refusing to dissolve just because Daniel had walked away. Lily had a trust fund now, opportunities waiting for her that Daniel could never provide through his own efforts. And he would have to live with the knowledge that no matter how hard he worked, no matter how well he raised her, there would always be that asterisk, that caveat. Your daughter's future was secured by someone else's gratitude, not your own sufficiency. Daniel closed the notebook and set it aside, turning off the lights and preparing for bed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new work, new efforts to make ends meet and keep Lily safe and build a life that felt earned rather than given. But tonight, the past had caught up with him, and nothing would ever be quite the same again. In her car, speeding back across the city toward a penthouse that felt emptier with every mile, Isabella Rowan clutched her phone and stared at the single name in her contacts she'd never called, Emma Chen, whose information she'd acquired the moment she'd made that impulsive job offer. She'd meant it, every word. Emma would work for her, would be protected by her, would have opportunities to prove herself in ways that didn't involve tolerating cruelty disguised as business culture. But more than that, Emma represented something Isabella hadn't felt in years, the possibility that power could be used for protection instead of domination, that wealth could create opportunity instead of just accumulating more wealth, that maybe, just maybe, her father's lessons about character hadn't been naive idealism, but a roadmap she'd lost sight of. Daniel Cross had reminded her of those lessons by standing calmly in a room of predators and refusing to let them feast unchallenged. He'd spent 12 years living by those principles in circumstances far harder than anything Isabella had ever faced. The least she could do was try to honor that example in a world that had forgotten what it meant. Her phone rang, Marcus Thornhill's name appearing on the screen. Isabella declined the call without hesitation. Then she blocked his number. Then she began composing an email to her legal team, outlining exactly which business relationships would be terminated effective immediately and which investors would be informed that Rowan Industries no longer desired their participation. It would cost her, financially, professionally, personally. Some of these people had been in her life since childhood, had known her father, had supported her ascension to CEO, but they'd also revealed themselves tonight, had shown her who they became when they thought there would be no consequences, had demonstrated that all their polish and education and sophistication meant nothing when measured against basic human decency. Her father would have approved of what she was about to do, would have stood beside her as she dismantled relationships and redirected resources and chose principle over profit. Daniel Cross would probably never know the full extent of what his calm intervention had set in motion, but Isabella would know. And that would have to be enough. The city passed by outside her window, thousands of lives being lived in the spaces between wealth and poverty, power and helplessness, choice and necessity. Somewhere in that vast urban landscape, a maintenance worker was tucking his daughter into bed, reading her a story, promising her a better tomorrow, even though he didn't know quite how he'd deliver it. And somewhere in that same landscape, a woman who'd almost drowned 12 years ago was finally learning to swim. The morning after the dinner, Marcus Thornhill's phone began ringing at 6:45. He ignored the first 3 calls, assuming they were from colleagues wanting to dissect the previous evening's dramatic confrontation. By the 4th call, he realized something was wrong. By the 7th, he knew his world was collapsing. The first email had arrived at 6:30 from Rowan Industries' legal department. Formal, clinical, devastating in its brevity. All existing contracts between Thornhill Development and Rowan Industries were being terminated effective immediately, with penalty clauses waived in exchange for expedited separation. Partnership discussions regarding the waterfront project were concluded. Future collaboration would not be pursued. The second email came from his own legal team, forwarding communication from 3 other major investors who'd been at last night's dinner. Each was withdrawing from the waterfront project, citing concerns about leadership and company culture. The words were diplomatic, but Marcus understood what they really meant. Associating with him had become toxic overnight. By 8 o'clock, Marcus sat in his office overlooking the city, watching his assistant field calls from reporters who'd somehow gotten wind that something significant had happened at a private dinner. The story was spreading through the interconnected world of high finance like a virus, mutating with each retelling but maintaining its essential DNA. Marcus Thornhill had humiliated someone at Isabella Rowan's table, and she'd responded by destroying his business prospects. His phone buzzed again. This time it was Gregory Walsh, Emma Chen's former boss, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Did you see the statement Rowan Industries just released?" Marcus hadn't. He pulled up his email, and there it was, sent to every major financial news outlet an hour ago, timed perfectly for the morning news cycle. Rowan Industries is committed to fostering business relationships built on mutual respect, ethical conduct, and the understanding that character matters more than capital. Recent events have clarified which partners share these values and which do not. We are proud to announce the termination of several long-standing relationships that no longer align with our company principles, and the establishment of new initiatives focused on workplace dignity, equitable treatment, and the creation of opportunities for talented individuals regardless of their economic background. This realignment represents not a retreat from profitable ventures, but a recommitment to the values upon which Thomas Rowan built this company, that true success is measured not in dollars accumulated, but in lives improved and dignity preserved. The statement was signed by Isabella Rowan personally, and it included a footnote that made Marcus's blood run cold. "In honor of my father's memory and the lessons he taught me about recognizing character in unexpected places, Rowan Industries is establishing the Thomas Rowan Character Scholarship, providing full educational funding for children of working-class families who demonstrate academic excellence and community service. The first recipient will be announced within the month." Marcus read it 3 times, each pass revealing new layers of calculation. Isabella wasn't just cutting ties. She was publicly reframing the narrative, positioning herself as the guardian of her father's legacy while painting everyone she'd severed relationships with as morally deficient. It was brilliant, ruthless, and utterly devastating. "She's declaring war," Gregory said on the phone, his voice hollow. "Not just on you, on all of us who were there." "She's doing more than that," Marcus replied, finally understanding the full scope of what Isabella had engineered. "She's making an example, showing the entire business community what happens when you mistake her tolerance for weakness." Within hours, the financial press had picked up the story, though the details remained deliberately vague. No one named Emma Chen directly. No one described the specific humiliation that had triggered Isabella's response. But everyone in their world understood the essential message. Isabella Rowan had witnessed something unacceptable and had wielded her considerable power to exact consequences. By noon, Marcus had lost 3 major clients. By evening, his board of directors had called an emergency meeting. By the time the sun set on what should have been a day of celebration for the waterfront project, Marcus Thornhill's reputation had been reduced to rubble, and his company's future hung in precarious balance. Across town, in a conference room at Rowan Industries headquarters, Emma Chen sat in a chair that probably cost more than her monthly rent and tried not to hyperventilate. Isabella Rowan sat across from her, flanked by 2 senior executives and a human resources director who'd spent the last hour explaining benefits packages and salary structures that seemed completely divorced from reality. "I need to be clear about something," Isabella said, her tone professional but not unkind. "This isn't charity. You're here because I believe you have value, not because I'm trying to rescue you. The moment you start thinking of yourself as someone I saved rather than someone I hired, you become useless to me. Understand?" Emma nodded, her throat too tight for words. The salary alone was more than she'd ever imagined earning, triple what Gregory Walsh had paid her, with benefits that included health care, retirement contributions, and education assistance. It was the kind of offer people spend entire careers working toward, and it had landed in her lap because she'd been in the wrong place at the right time. "I understand if you're overwhelmed," Isabella continued, her expression softening slightly. "This is a significant change. But I want you to know why I made this offer, and it has nothing to do with pity." "Then why?" Emma managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. Isabella leaned back in her chair, her fingers drumming once on the polished conference table. "Because last night, in that dining room, You were the only person besides Daniel Cross who maintained your dignity. Everyone else either participated in cruelty or remained silent while it happened. You endured it without fighting back, without making a scene, without giving them the satisfaction of seeing you break. That takes strength most people don't have. I was terrified, Emma admitted. Being brave doesn't mean not being scared, Isabella replied. It means being scared and maintaining your principles anyway. You did that. So yes, you're here because of what happened last night, but not because I'm trying to make amends for other people's behavior. You're here because you demonstrated exactly the kind of character I want in my organization. Emma felt tears threatening and forced them back. She'd cried enough in the past 24 hours, had spent the night alternating between shock and disbelief, unable to process how completely her life had transformed. What will I be doing? For the first 3 months, you'll be rotating through different departments, learning how the company operates, Isabella explained. After that, we'll find the best fit for your skills. But ultimately, I want you working on the new initiatives I announced this morning. The scholarship program, workplace dignity standards, community investment projects. Things that require someone who understands what it means to struggle, who hasn't forgotten what it feels like to be underestimated. One of the senior executives, a woman named Catherine Park, spoke up. We'll be establishing entirely new divisions focused on these initiatives. Emma, you'll have opportunities to help shape these programs from the ground up. It's challenging work, but also incredibly meaningful. Emma looked around the table at faces that, 24 hours ago, would have been completely inaccessible to her. Now they were colleagues, peers, people who apparently believed she belonged in rooms like this. I don't have an MBA, she said quietly. I don't have the connections or the background that most people in these positions have. No, you don't, Isabella agreed. You have something more valuable. You have perspective we desperately need. Everyone at this company came from privilege or climbed the ladder by becoming like the people who had privilege. You're different. You remember what it's like to be on the outside. That perspective is worth more than any degree. The meeting continued for another hour, covering logistics and expectations, introducing Emma to people whose names she'd only seen in business publications, explaining systems and protocols that seemed designed to be deliberately complicated. By the time it ended, Emma's head was spinning, and her carefully maintained composure was beginning to crack. Isabella noticed. Catherine, can you give Emma and me the room? The executives filed out efficiently, and suddenly Emma was alone with the woman who'd transformed her life with a single decision. Isabella stood and moved to the windows that offered a panoramic view of the city, her silhouette backlit by afternoon sun. I know this is overwhelming, Isabella said without turning around. I know you're probably terrified that you'll fail, that you don't deserve this, that someone's going to realize they made a mistake and take it all away. Yes, Emma whispered. Good, Isabella replied, finally turning to face her. That fear will keep you sharp. The moment you start thinking you've earned this through some inherent superiority, rather than a combination of competence and timing, you'll become exactly like the people who humiliated you last night. She moved back to the conference table but didn't sit, instead leaning against it casually. I'm going to tell you something I've never told anyone in this company. Emma waited, hardly breathing. 12 years ago, I almost drowned, Isabella said. I was 17 riding in a car with my father, completely certain about who I was and what my life would be. Then we went into a river, and suddenly none of that mattered. I was dying, Emma. Freezing water, no air, absolute terror. And a stranger jumped in and pulled me out. Saved my father. Tried to save our driver, but couldn't. Emma remembered Daniel Cross's calm presence in the dining room, the way he'd moved with absolute certainty despite the hostile environment. Daniel, she said. Isabella nodded. Daniel Cross, the maintenance worker in dirty boots who walked into a room of billionaires and changed everything just by refusing to accept cruelty as normal. She moved to sit in the chair beside Emma rather than across from her, a gesture of equality that felt deliberate. For 12 years I've been trying to understand why he disappeared after saving us, why he refused my father's offers of help, why he chose a life of struggle when he could have had comfort. Last night, I finally understood. Why? Emma asked. Because accepting help would have changed who he was, Isabella replied. would have made him someone who owed his success to a debt rather than someone who built his life through his own effort. He understood that character isn't something you can purchase or have gifted to you. It's something you forge through choices, especially choices that cost you something. Isabella stood and walked to a cabinet along the wall, pulling out a leather notebook that looked old and well-handled. My father wrote in this notebook, promised Daniel anything he wanted if he'd just accept help. And Daniel read those promises and walked away anyway. Not because he didn't need help. He was a widower with an infant daughter, working maintenance jobs and barely surviving. He needed help desperately, but he needed his identity more. She handed the notebook to Emma, who took it carefully, aware she was holding something precious. The handwriting inside was strong and confident, the words of a powerful man making promises he'd fully intended to keep. Daniel showed that notebook to me last night, Isabella continued. Let me see what he chose instead of everything my father offered. And it was beautiful, Emma. Difficult and precarious and exhausting, but authentic in a way nothing in my world has ever been. She took the notebook back, holding it like a talisman. I'm not going to pretend that what I'm offering you is anything like what my father offered Daniel. You're not here because of some grand gesture or moral debt. You're here because you're competent, and because I need people who haven't forgotten what it means to struggle. But I want you to understand something important. What? Emma asked. This opportunity doesn't define you, Isabella said firmly. What you do with it defines you. You can accept it and use it to build something meaningful, or you can accept it and let it transform you into someone who thinks they're superior because of where they work rather than who they are. The choice is entirely yours, and it's a choice you'll have to make every single day. Emma understood then what Isabella was really saying, that opportunity and character were separate things, that accepting help didn't diminish personal worth, but letting help corrupt your values absolutely did. I won't let you down, she said. Don't make promises you can't guarantee, Isabella replied. Just show up every day and do your best work. That's all anyone can ask. The meeting ended shortly after, and Emma left Rowan Industries headquarters in a daze, stepping out into a city that looked exactly the same but felt completely different. She had a new job, a new salary, a new future that had materialized from nothing in the span of 24 hours. All because she'd endured humiliation with dignity, and a stranger had decided that cruelty shouldn't go unchallenged. That evening, as news of Marcus Thornhill's collapse spread through the business community, Daniel Cross returned to his apartment after another day of maintenance work at the Sterling Heights Hotel. The management had pulled him aside that morning, informed him that several high-profile guests had specifically requested he be assigned to their events, praising his professionalism and discretion. They were offering him a promotion, lead maintenance supervisor with a significant raise and better hours. He'd accepted, understanding that word had somehow spread about what happened in the grandeur room, that his intervention had been witnessed and discussed and deemed valuable by people who'd never previously noticed his existence. The promotion was legitimate, earned through years of reliable work, but catalyzed by a single moment of moral clarity. Lily noticed his mood immediately when he walked through the door. You're smiling, Daddy. Did something good happen? Something good happened, Daniel confirmed, lifting her into a hug. I got promoted at work. It means more money and better hours. Maybe we can finally fix that toaster. Lily laughed, the sound filling their small apartment with joy. Or we could just keep eating cereal. I like cereal. We'll see, Daniel said, setting her down and moving to start dinner. As he worked, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Isabella Rowan. I wanted you to know that Emma Chen started at Rowan Industries today. She's brilliant and terrified and going to do incredible things. Thank you for reminding me that power should protect people, not diminish them. And thank you for letting me meet Lily. She's everything I hoped she would be. Daniel read the message twice, then typed a simple response. You're welcome. Your father would be proud of what you're doing. The reply came quickly. I hope so. I'm trying to honor his memory by actually living the principles he taught me instead of just inheriting his money. It's harder than I expected. The right things usually are, Daniel wrote back. There was a pause, then one final message from Isabella. The trust fund for Lily still exists. I know you don't want it, but it's there when she's ready. My father believed she deserved opportunities, and I agree. Let her decide for herself when the time comes. Daniel stared at those words for a long moment, wrestling with pride and pragmatism, independence and responsibility. Finally, he typed, "Okay, but she grows up knowing that her father provided for her, not someone else's guilt or gratitude." "Agreed," came Isabella's response. "Her father is providing for her. The trust is just insurance, not replacement." The conversation ended there, and Daniel put his phone away, returning his attention to dinner and his daughter and the life he'd chosen despite all the alternatives. The promotion meant stability, meant they could move to a better apartment soon, meant Lily could have new clothes when she needed them, instead of when they could barely afford them. But it didn't change the fundamental truth Daniel had built his life around. That character came from choices. That dignity came from effort. That self-respect required knowing your success belonged to you and no one else. Across the city, in elegant offices and expensive restaurants, the fallout from that night in the grandeur room continued to ripple outward. Veronica Sterling had lost 2 major clients within hours of Isabella's public statement. Gregory Walsh was facing an internal review at his company, his judgment questioned, his future uncertain. Derek Fontaine had issued a public apology that rang hollow and changed nothing. But Marcus Thornhill bore the brunt of Isabella's calculated fury. By week's end, the waterfront project had collapsed entirely. His board had forced his resignation, and his name had become synonymous with the kind of casual cruelty that the business world was supposedly evolving beyond. He'd become an object lesson, a cautionary tale about what happened when you mistook tolerance for weakness, when you assumed power meant immunity from consequences. He'd been brought down not by illegal activity or financial malfeasance, but by the simple act of being cruel to someone who couldn't fight back, and doing it in front of someone who could and would. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, least of all Marcus himself, who sat in his now former office and realized that in trying to humiliate Emma Chen, he'd actually humiliated himself far more thoroughly than she could ever have managed. He'd revealed his character at exactly the wrong moment, in front of exactly the wrong person, and had paid a price that no amount of money or connections could redeem. Meanwhile, Emma Chen worked 16-hour days learning systems and protocols, proving to herself and everyone watching that she belonged in the position Isabella had given her. She made mistakes, asked questions that revealed her inexperience, struggled with concepts that others took for granted. But she also brought insights that no one else in the building possessed, asked questions that challenged assumptions, and approached problems from angles that years of privilege had blinded others to seeing. Within a month, she'd become invaluable to the new initiatives Isabella had announced. Her understanding of what working-class families actually needed, cutting through the theoretical approaches that well-meaning but disconnected executives had proposed. She didn't just belong in those conference rooms. She was essential to them, her perspective the missing piece that made the difference between performative charity and genuine impact. And through it all, she carried with her the memory of a maintenance worker in dirty boots who'd placed a glass of water in front of her and said 3 words that changed everything. "She's with me." A claim of connection where none had existed, a declaration of solidarity against people who believed they had the right to diminish others, a simple act of courage that had set everything else in motion. Daniel Cross had gone back to his maintenance work, his small apartment, his quiet life with his daughter. But the consequences of his moment in that dining room continued to cascade through the lives of everyone who'd been there, transforming business relationships and corporate priorities and individual understandings of what power actually meant and how it should be wielded. Isabella Rowan had found purpose beyond profit, had reconnected with principles her father had taught her, had learned that the girl who almost drowned 12 years ago still lived inside the woman who commanded billions, and that listening to that girl's wisdom mattered more than maintaining the carefully constructed armor she'd built around herself. Emma Chen had discovered that dignity under pressure was worth more than credentials or connections. The character revealed in crisis opened doors that ambition alone never could, that sometimes the most important thing you could do was simply refuse to let cruelty break you. And Marcus Thornhill had learned, far too late, that power without character was just a longer fall when consequences finally arrived. The city continued its rhythm, indifferent to the dramas playing out in its expensive restaurants and executive suites. But for the people whose lives had intersected that night in the grandeur room, nothing would ever be quite the same. A glass of water placed on a table, 3 words spoken with quiet certainty. one man's refusal to let injustice pass unchallenged. These small acts had rewritten futures and redefined relationships and reminded everyone involved that sometimes the quietest voice carried the sharpest truth. That dignity mattered more than status. That character revealed itself in how you treated people who couldn't fight back. That true power lay not in the ability to diminish others, but in the courage to stand with them even when it cost you something. Daniel Cross had known these truths all along, had lived them every day in circumstances far harder than anything the people in that dining room had ever faced. He hadn't needed Isabella Rowan's money or Marcus Thornhill's connections or anyone's approval to understand what actually mattered. He just needed to be the kind of man he wanted his daughter to know her father was. Someone who helped when helping was hard, who spoke when silence would have been easier, who understood that the measure of a life wasn't found in bank accounts or professional titles, but in moments when you chose to act according to your values, even when no one was watching, even when there was nothing to gain and everything to lose. That was the lesson Thomas Rowan had learned 12 years ago when a stranger jumped into freezing water. That was the lesson Isabella had finally remembered. That was the lesson Emma was learning every day in her new position. And that was the lesson Marcus Thornhill and his associates had failed completely, their power and privilege blinding them to the simple truth that character was the only currency that actually mattered in the end. The reversal was complete. The powerful had been humbled. The powerless had been elevated. And the man who'd catalyzed everything had gone back to his quiet life, unchanged by the chaos he'd created, still fixing buildings and raising his daughter and living according to principles that needed no reward beyond the knowledge that he'd done the right thing. She's with me. 3 words that had rewritten the rules, redistributed power, and reminded everyone listening that sometimes protection mattered more than profit, that solidarity was stronger than status, and that one person's courage could change everything if they were brave enough to speak when speaking cost them something. The world would keep turning. New deals would be made, new hierarchies established. New people would rise and fall according to the same ruthless dynamics that had always governed high finance. But everyone who'd been in that room would carry the memory of what happened when someone finally said enough. When consequences arrived for cruelty, when power was wielded not to accumulate more power but to defend someone who desperately needed defending. And that memory would shape every choice they made going forward, every interaction they had, every moment when they faced the decision between expedience and ethics, between profit and principle, between who they were and who they could choose to become. Daniel Cross had given them that gift without knowing it, without wanting it, without expecting anything in return. Just like he'd done 12 years ago when he jumped into freezing water and pulled 2 people from certain death. Some people were just built that way, to help when helping was needed, to speak when speaking mattered, to act according to their values regardless of cost or consequence. And sometimes, just sometimes, the world noticed and changed because of them. 3 months after that night in the grandeur room, Daniel stood in the maintenance office at the Sterling Heights Hotel, staring at a letter that had arrived in the morning mail. The envelope was heavy, expensive paper with embossed letterhead from Rowan Industries. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it, though he already suspected what it contained. The letter was brief and formal, signed by Isabella herself. The Thomas Rowan Character Scholarship had selected its first recipient, a 7-year-old girl named Lily Cross. In recognition of her academic excellence, her demonstrated compassion for others, and her father's embodiment of the principles the scholarship was designed to honor. Daniel read it 3 times, his vision blurring on the final pass. He'd known about the scholarship, had seen the announcement, had even helped Lily fill out the application at her teacher's insistence, but he'd never imagined Isabella would choose his daughter for the inaugural award. The gesture was too personal, too deliberate, too obviously designed to force him to accept help he'd spent 12 years refusing. "Bad news?" Martinez asked, noticing Daniel's expression. "I don't know yet," Daniel replied honestly, folding the letter carefully and tucking it into his jacket pocket. The scholarship meant Lily's education was secured from elementary school through college, meant she'd have opportunities Daniel could never provide on his salary alone, meant the financial stress that had defined every day of her life would disappear like morning fog. It meant everything. It also meant accepting that his daughter's future would be shaped by Thomas Rowan's gratitude, That no matter how hard Daniel worked or how well he provided, there would always be that asterisk, that qualifier. Your daughter succeeded because someone else intervened. Daniel finished his shift in a fog, his mind churning through implications and emotions he'd thought he'd settled years ago. When he picked up Lily from school that afternoon, she was vibrating with barely contained excitement. "Mrs. Patterson said a fancy lady came to school today," Lily announced, bouncing on her toes as they walked home. "She talked to Principal Morrison for a long time." "Was it about me?" Daniel's chest tightened. Isabella had gone to Lily's school personally, had made the announcement in person rather than through intermediaries. The gesture was deliberate, another layer of meaning he'd need to unpack. "It might have been," Daniel said carefully. "Let's talk about it when we get home." But when they reached their apartment building, Isabella Rowan was waiting in the lobby, looking profoundly out of place in her tailored suit among the worn furniture and peeling paint. She stood when she saw them, her expression uncertain in a way Daniel had never seen. "I should have called first," Isabella said, "but I wanted to tell you in person." Lily's eyes went wide with recognition. "You're the princess lady who came to visit." Isabella's smile was genuine and sad at the same time. "I'm the lady who came to visit, yes." "Hello again, Lily." Daniel felt trapped between gratitude and resentment, between the knowledge that Lily deserved this opportunity and the painful understanding that accepting it would fundamentally change their relationship with independence. "We got the letter," he said quietly. "I assumed you would have," Isabella replied. "Can we talk? All three of us?" Daniel wanted to refuse, wanted to tell her that she'd crossed a line by making his daughter the centerpiece of her redemption narrative. But Lily was looking up at him with such hope, such uncomplicated joy at this unexpected visit that he found himself nodding. They climbed the stairs to the apartment in silence, the awkwardness palpable. Once inside, Lily immediately began showing Isabella her latest drawings, oblivious to the tension radiating between the adults. "These are beautiful," Isabella said, examining a crayon picture of what appeared to be a family, a man, a small girl, and another figure that might have been meant to represent Isabella herself. "Is this from when I visited?" "Yeah," Lily confirmed. "Daddy said you were someone important who he helped a long time ago, so I drew us all together because people who help each other should be friends." Daniel saw Isabella's composure crack, saw the tears she tried to hide by turning away. "That's a lovely way to think about it," Isabella managed. "Lily, sweetheart, can you go to your room for a few minutes?" Daniel asked gently. "I need to talk to Ms. Rowan about grown-up things." Lily hesitated, clearly wanting to stay, but she'd been raised to respect her father's requests. "Okay, but don't be too long. I want to show her my spelling test. I got 100%. "We won't be long," Daniel promised. Once Lily had retreated to her room, Daniel gestured for Isabella to sit on the couch. He took the chair across from her, maintaining distance that felt necessary for this conversation. "You should have asked me first," Daniel said, his voice level but firm. "Before making Lily the face of your scholarship program." "I know," Isabella admitted, "and I almost did. I had my assistant draft 3 different versions of a letter asking your permission, but every version felt like I was asking you to compromise the principles you've built your life around. So I made a unilateral decision, and I'm sorry for that." "Then why did you do it?" Isabella leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Because 3 months ago, you walked into a room where you didn't belong and defended someone who desperately needed defending. You risked your job, your reputation, everything because you believed it was the right thing to do. And in doing that, you reminded me of what my father spent his entire life trying to teach me, that character reveals itself in moments when there's nothing to gain and everything to lose." "That doesn't answer my question," Daniel said. "I chose Lily because she's being raised by someone who embodies those principles," Isabella continued, "because every day you make choices that prioritize dignity over expedience, character over comfort, because she's learning through your example what it means to help others, even when helping costs you something. That's exactly what the scholarship is supposed to recognize, not academic achievement alone, but the kind of moral foundation that creates people who make the world better just by being in it." Daniel shook his head slowly. "You're making this about me when it should be about her." "It's about both of you," Isabella insisted. "Daniel, I've spent 3 months restructuring my entire company around the principles my father believed in. I've lost clients, damaged relationships, taken financial hits that my board thinks are insane. And every time someone questions whether it's worth it, I think about you standing in that dining room in your work boots, placing a glass of water on a table, and refusing to let cruelty go unchallenged. She stood, pacing to the window, her silhouette reminiscent of that night at her penthouse. You saved my life 12 years ago by pulling me from a river. You saved it again 3 months ago by reminding me that the girl who almost drowned deserved better than what I'd become. I can't repay either of those debts, but I can make sure your daughter has every opportunity to become the kind of person you're raising her to be. She already is that person, Daniel said quietly. The scholarship doesn't make her worthy. She's worthy because of who she is, not because of what you're giving her. I know that, Isabella replied, but worthy people still need opportunities. And you've spent 7 years sacrificing your own possibilities to make sure she has a stable life. This scholarship doesn't diminish what you've done. It just means you don't have to do it alone anymore. The words hit Daniel harder than he expected, cutting through defenses he'd maintained for so long they'd become part of his identity. He'd spent years believing that accepting help meant admitting inadequacy, that independence required refusing assistance even when that assistance could transform his daughter's life. But looking around the small apartment, at the furniture he'd salvaged and repaired, at the walls he'd painted himself, at the evidence of 7 years of relentless effort to provide everything Lily needed on a maintenance worker's salary, Daniel realized that pride and practicality didn't have to be enemies, that accepting help for his daughter wasn't the same as accepting he'd failed her. If I agree to this, Daniel said slowly, Lily needs to understand something critical. This scholarship is an opportunity, not an entitlement. It doesn't make her better than other kids, doesn't mean she deserves success more than anyone else. It means someone recognized potential and chose to invest in it, and that investment creates responsibility, not superiority. Agreed completely, Isabella said immediately. In fact, part of the scholarship program includes community service requirements. Recipients will be expected to help others, to understand that opportunities come with obligations. Daniel studied her face, looking for any sign of the emotionally detached billionaire he'd encountered 3 months ago. She was still there, the careful control and strategic thinking that had made her successful, but something else was present now too. The girl who'd almost drowned, who'd been given a second chance and was finally learning what to do with it. Okay, Daniel said, on one condition. Name it. Lily meets the other scholarship recipients. She needs to understand she's not special or chosen. She's one of many kids getting this opportunity, and she needs to build relationships with them, needs to see that she's part of a community, not standing above it. Isabella's smile was the most genuine Daniel had ever seen from her. The program is designed exactly that way. There will be 10 recipients this year, 20 next year, scaling up as we establish proper infrastructure. They'll have group activities, mentorship programs, opportunities to work together on community projects. Lily won't be isolated or elevated, she'll be connected. Relief flooded through Daniel's chest. Then, yes, thank you for Lily and for understanding why this was difficult for me. Thank you for raising a daughter worth investing in, Isabella replied, and for continuing to remind me what actually matters. The conversation shifted then, becoming easier, more natural. Isabella asked about Lily's interests, her favorite subjects, what she hoped to be when she grew up. Daniel found himself relaxing, sharing stories about his daughter's endless curiosity, her compassion for classmates who struggled, her habit of befriending the lonely kids at school. She gets that from you, Isabella observed. She gets that from her mother, Daniel corrected. Sarah was the kindest person I've ever known. She saw the best in everyone, always believed people deserve second chances. Lily has her heart. But your courage, Isabella said. That night in the river, you jumped in without hesitation. 3 months ago, you walked into that dining room the same way. Lily will grow up knowing her father stands up for what's right regardless of cost. That's an incredible gift. Before Daniel could respond, Lily emerged from her room, unable to contain her curiosity any longer. Are you done with the grown-up talk? Can I show Isabella my spelling test now? Daniel laughed, the tension finally breaking completely. Yes, princess. Show her your spelling test. Lily ran to get her backpack, and Isabella moved to sit on the floor, clearly planning to meet Lily at her level rather than tower over her. Daniel watched this interaction with emotions he couldn't quite name. gratitude and sadness and hope all tangled together. When Lily returned, she had not just her spelling test, but also the drawing she'd mentioned earlier, the one showing the three of them together. She handed it to Isabella with 7-year-old solemnity. "This is for you," Lily said, "because Daddy says when people do nice things for you, you should give them something back. And I don't have money, but I have drawings." Isabella took the picture with hands that trembled visibly. The drawing was simple, executed in the limited palette of a child's crayon box, but the emotion behind it was unmistakable. 3 figures beneath a rainbow, holding hands, smiling. "This is the most valuable thing anyone's given me in years," Isabella said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "Thank you, Lily. I'll treasure it always." "You can put it on your refrigerator," Lily suggested helpfully. "That's where Daddy puts my best drawings." "I have a better idea," Isabella replied. "I'm going to frame it and put it in my office where I can see it every day. It'll remind me of what's truly important." Lily beamed with pride, then launched into an animated description of her spelling test, her science project, her best friend's birthday party, all the minutiae of a 7-year-old's life that somehow felt profound in this moment. Isabella listened with complete attention, asking questions and responding with genuine interest, and Daniel saw clearly what he'd been resisting, that his daughter deserved this connection, this mentorship, this glimpse of a world beyond their small apartment and struggling neighborhood. Accepting the scholarship didn't mean betraying his principles. It meant giving Lily access to opportunities while teaching her that opportunities came with responsibilities, that privilege required purpose, that success measured itself not in what you accumulated, but in how you used your advantages to help others. Eventually, Isabella stood to leave, and Lily hugged her with the unselfconscious affection of a child who'd decided someone was trustworthy. "Will you come visit again?" "If your father says it's okay, I'd love to," Isabella replied, looking to Daniel for permission. Daniel nodded. "You're welcome here. Anytime." At the door, Isabella paused, her hand on the knob. "There's one more thing I need to tell you. Emma Chen, the woman you defended that night, she's thriving at Rowan Industries. She's brilliant and brave, and exactly the kind of person my father would have loved to mentor. She asks about you sometimes, wants to thank you properly." "She doesn't owe me thanks," Daniel said. "She knows that," Isabella replied. "But gratitude isn't always about debt. Sometimes it's just about acknowledging that someone's courage changed your life, and you want them to know it mattered." After Isabella left, Daniel sat on the couch with Lily curled against his side, both of them processing the day's events in their own ways. Outside, the city continued its relentless rhythm, indifferent to the small transformations happening in countless apartments and offices and hearts. "Daddy?" Lily said quietly. "Is Isabella going to help me go to college?" "Yes," Daniel confirmed. "She's going to make sure you can go to any college you want, study anything you're interested in." Lily considered this seriously. "That's really nice of her. We should do something nice back." "What did you have in mind?" "We could invite her for Saturday pancakes," Lily suggested. "You always say Saturday pancakes are the best thing we make, and sharing the best things is how you show people they matter." Daniel hugged his daughter closer, overwhelmed by her uncomplicated wisdom, her instinctive understanding of reciprocity and relationship. "That's a perfect idea, Princess. We'll invite her next weekend." The following Saturday, Isabella Rowan arrived at Daniel's apartment at 9 in the morning, wearing jeans and a simple sweater that probably cost more than Daniel's monthly rent, but looked almost normal in their modest surroundings. Lily greeted her at the door with enthusiasm, pulling her into the tiny kitchen where Daniel was already preparing pancake batter. "I've never actually made pancakes," Isabella admitted, watching Daniel work with practiced efficiency at the ancient stove. "Never?" Lily asked, scandalized. "How do you eat breakfast?" "Usually someone makes it for me," Isabella replied, "or I skip it entirely." "That's terrible," Lily declared with the absolute certainty of a child. "Breakfast is the most important meal. Daddy says so." Daniel handed Isabella a spatula. "Time to learn then. Lily will supervise." What followed was the most surreal hour of Daniel's life. A billionaire heiress learning to flip pancakes in his cramped kitchen, while his 7-year-old daughter offered running commentary on technique and proper syrup distribution. Isabella burned the first 2 attempts, produced one that was somehow both raw and overcooked, and finally managed a pancake that Lily declared almost perfect. They ate at the small table that barely fit 3 people, passing syrup and butter, talking about everything and nothing. Isabella told stories about her father, about Thomas Rowan's legendary pancake breakfast that had become family tradition. Lily shared her dream of becoming a teacher who helped kids who struggled with reading. Daniel mostly listened, watching 2 people from completely different worlds find common ground over breakfast food and genuine connection. "My father would have loved this," Isabella said quietly, looking around the modest apartment with something like wonder. He spent his whole life in mansions and boardrooms, but what he valued most were moments like this: simple, authentic, real. "This is what he wanted for me," Daniel said, finally understanding completely. Not his money or his connections. He wanted me to have this, a life built on love and purpose rather than obligation and debt. He understood what I needed even before I did. "He did," Isabella agreed, "and he'd be happy knowing that his scholarship is helping Lily while honoring what you've built here. He'd see it as supporting your family, not replacing your role in it." The scholarship announcement became public the following week, and Daniel's small apartment was suddenly invaded by reporters and photographers wanting the human interest story behind the inaugural recipient. He carefully controlled Lily's exposure, allowing only one interview with a journalist he trusted, making sure his daughter understood that attention was temporary but character was permanent. Emma Chen came to visit one evening, bringing flowers and a thank you card she'd written by hand. She sat on the same couch where Isabella had sat, in the same apartment where her life had transformed, and told Daniel that she'd never forgotten what he'd done. "I was ready to quit," Emma said. "After that night, I was ready to leave the industry entirely, convinced that success required becoming like the people who humiliated me. But you showed me there was another way, that you could stand up without tearing others down, that you could be powerful without being cruel." "I just didn't want to see someone hurt," Daniel replied. "You did more than that," Emma insisted. "You reminded everyone in that room that character matters more than status." And then Isabella took that reminder and transformed her entire company around it. She established workplace dignity standards, created mentorship programs for people from non-traditional backgrounds, redirected millions in investment toward companies that prioritize ethical treatment of employees. All of that started because you placed a glass of water on a table and said 3 words. Daniel shook his head. "Isabella did that. Not me." "You gave her permission to care," Emma corrected. "You showed her it was possible to use power for protection instead of domination. That mattered more than you'll ever know." Over the following months, the ripple effects of that night continued to spread. Marcus Thornhill never recovered professionally, his name becoming synonymous with the kind of casual cruelty that the business world was supposedly evolving beyond. But he did something unexpected. He started volunteering at a community center in a struggling neighborhood, teaching financial literacy to working-class families. It was a small redemption, insufficient to erase what he'd done, but genuine in its effort to become better than he'd been. Veronica Sterling quietly left the investment banking world, taking a position at a nonprofit focused on economic justice. She never publicly apologized, never explained her career change, but those who knew her recognized it as an attempt to rebuild character she'd traded away for success. Gregory Walsh restructured his entire company, implementing mandatory training on workplace respect and establishing anonymous reporting systems for harassment. It was too late for Emma, but perhaps not too late for the next person who'd need protection. The city continued evolving, small changes accumulating into larger transformations. Not because one night in a dining room had magically fixed systemic problems, but because enough people had witnessed what happened when courage confronted cruelty, when power protected instead of punished, when someone finally said enough and meant it. Daniel Cross returned to his maintenance work. His promotion making life easier, but not fundamentally changing who he was or how he approached his days. He fixed buildings, raised his daughter, lived according to principles that required no audience or applause. But he also accepted that his daughter's future would be shaped by opportunities he couldn't have provided alone, and that accepting help for her didn't diminish what he'd accomplished for them both. Lily thrived, her natural intelligence and compassion finding fertile ground in the scholarship program Isabella had created. She met other kids from struggling families, kids who were brilliant and kind and deserving, kids who'd been given chances they'd used to make the world better. She learned that privilege came with responsibility, that success required purpose, that the measure of a life wasn't found in what you accumulated, but in how you used your advantages to help others. And Isabella Rowan discovered something her father had known all along, that the girl who'd almost drowned 12 years ago had been saved for a reason, and that reason had nothing to do with building wealth or accumulating power. She'd been saved so she could learn what those things were actually for, so she could understand that the stranger who pulled her from freezing water had given her not just more time, but a blueprint for what to do with that time. Protect people who need protecting. Stand up. When standing up is hard, use whatever advantages you have to create opportunities for others. Measure success not in quarterly reports or stock prices, but in lives improved and dignity preserved. Thomas Rowan had spent 12 years looking for the man who'd saved him, not to repay a debt, but to understand how someone could be so brave, so selfless, so utterly unconcerned with personal gain. He died still looking, still wondering, still hoping to learn that lesson. But his daughter had finally found the answer, had learned it from the same man her father had sought, had discovered that character revealed itself in moments when there was nothing to gain and everything to lose, and that true strength came not from power but from the courage to use whatever you had, a voice, a position, a glass of water, to stand with someone who desperately needed someone to stand with them. Years later, when Lily graduated from high school at the top of her class, preparing to attend a university her father could never have afforded, she gave a speech that brought the entire auditorium to tears. She talked about her father, about growing up in a small apartment where love mattered more than luxury, about learning that character was built through choices and dignity came from effort and self-respect required. Knowing your success belonged to you and the people who believed in you. She talked about a scholarship that had changed her life, about a woman named Isabella Rowan who'd honored her own father's memory by investing in children who reminded her what actually mattered. She talked about opportunities and responsibilities, about privilege and purpose, about the obligation to use advantages to help others the way she'd been helped. But mostly, she talked about a night she didn't remember, when her father had placed a glass of water on a table and said 3 words that stopped a room cold, that challenged cruelty and demanded dignity, that reminded everyone listening that sometimes the quietest voice carried the sharpest truth. She's with me. A claim of connection, a declaration of solidarity, a simple act of courage that had set everything else in motion. 3 words that meant protection mattered more than profit, that character revealed itself in defense of others, that one person's choice to act could change everything if they were brave enough to speak when speaking cost them something. Daniel Cross sat in the audience, tears streaming down his face, watching his daughter become the woman her mother would have been proud of, the person he'd spent every day of the last 18 years trying to raise her to be. He thought about Sarah, about the girl who'd believed everyone deserved second chances. He thought about Thomas Rowan, about a man who'd understood that wealth without character was just decorated emptiness. He thought about Isabella, about someone who'd learned to swim by nearly drowning. But mostly, he thought about that night 12 years before Lily was born, when he'd jumped into freezing water without thinking, when he'd pulled 2 strangers from certain death because helping was what you did when people needed help. He thought about every choice since then, every sacrifice, every moment when he'd chosen principle over expedience and dignity over comfort. He'd built a life on those choices, had raised a daughter who understood their value, had reminded others that character wasn't something you could purchase or inherit, but something you forged through daily decisions about who you wanted to be and what you were willing to stand for. The applause when Lily finished speaking was thunderous, sustained, filled with genuine emotion from people who recognized they'd witnessed something rare. A young person who understood that success carried obligations, that privilege required purpose, that opportunities came with responsibilities to help others climb the same ladders you'd used. After the ceremony, after the photographs and congratulations and celebration, Daniel stood with Lily and Isabella outside the auditorium, watching the sun set over a city that had witnessed their interconnected transformation. 3 people whose lives had collided in freezing water and elegant dining rooms, in small apartments and corporate headquarters, in moments of crisis and quiet revelation. "Thank you," Lily said to Isabella, hugging the woman who'd invested in her future, "for everything." "Thank you for reminding me why my father built his empire," Isabella replied. "For showing me that money only matters if you use it to create more people like you, brave and kind and determined to make the world better. She turned to Daniel, extending her hand. He took it, and for a moment they stood connected by a handshake that represented 12 years of questions finally answered, debts finally resolved, lessons finally learned. "Your father would be proud of what you've built," Daniel said. "I hope so," Isabella replied. "But more than that, I hope he'd be proud of what we all built together. The scholarship, the changed company culture, the ripple effects that started with you placing a glass of water on a table and refusing to let cruelty win." "It wasn't about winning," Daniel said. "It was about doing what was right." "I know," Isabella said. "That's exactly why it mattered." They stood together watching the city lights begin to glow against the darkening sky. Three people who'd learned that salvation came in many forms, pulled from rivers, defended in dining rooms, given opportunities that transformed futures. That power meant nothing without character. Wealth meant nothing without purpose. Success meant nothing without dignity. That sometimes the most important thing you could do was simply refuse to let injustice pass unchallenged, to stand with someone who needed someone to stand with them, to place a glass of water on a table and say 3 words with absolute conviction. "She's with me." A declaration that changed everything because it reminded everyone that protection mattered, solidarity mattered, courage mattered more than comfort or status or any temporary advantage gained by diminishing others. The night deepened around them, and eventually they parted, Lily to celebrate with friends, Isabella to her penthouse that no longer felt empty, Daniel to the apartment he'd finally saved enough to move from, upgrading to a place where his daughter could have her own bathroom, and he could have a kitchen that fit more than 2 people. But before they separated, Lily did one more thing. She pulled from her bag a crayon drawing she'd made that morning, similar to the one she'd given Isabella years before, but more sophisticated now, showing growth in skill and the artistic eye she'd developed. 3 figures beneath a rainbow, but this time each was clearly defined. Her father in his work clothes, Isabella in her business suit, and Lily herself in a graduation cap. She handed it to her father. "For you, Daddy, to remember that people who help each other become family even when they start as strangers." Daniel took the drawing with hands that trembled with overwhelming emotion. "I'll treasure this always, Princess." "I know," Lily said with the confidence of someone who'd been treasured her entire life. "Because you treasure what matters. You taught me that." And in that moment, standing between the daughter he'd raised and the woman whose life he'd saved twice, Daniel Cross understood completely what Thomas Rowan had been trying to tell him 12 years ago when he'd written those promises in a leather notebook. It wasn't about debt or repayment or obligation. It was about recognizing that lives intersected for reasons, that courage created connections, that sometimes saving someone meant being saved yourself in ways you'd never expected. He'd pulled Isabella from freezing water and given her more time. She'd used that time to become someone who honored her father's principles by investing in the next generation. Lily had benefited from that investment and would use her advantages to help others the way she'd been helped. The circle was complete. The debt was paid. The lesson was learned. Character mattered more than wealth. Dignity mattered more than status. And sometimes the quietest voice, speaking 3 simple words, carried enough truth to change the world. "She's with me, now and always." The end.